the springtime when the earth is new, to the fairies they draw near.
Hey everyone, it's Jonathan, and welcome to a probably unnecessarily deep dive into Disney's Tinkerbell franchise. I say probably unnecessary, but for people who grew up with this series, this may not even be deep enough. I was unprepared for how much stuff there would be to talk about with these. This episode was originally a 3-part miniseries for the Disney Movie Marathon and Every Version Ever, but I thought for the main podcast, I would just go all out and give you the full-length extended version I'd normally save for Patreon. Today I'm joined by Katie Fabrick. I'd been planning to cover the Tinkerbell franchise for my series on Peter Pan, but I was an adult when these came out and I'd never watched any of them, and for some reason I thought even covering 6 films, it'd be a pretty quick episode. I figured I'd find another Disney fan to talk about them with, but I wasn't holding my breath for someone who'd seen them, because unless you were the target audience when these came out, it seems kind of unlikely that you'd have sought them out to watch yourself. But as soon as I found out that Katie actually kind of grew up with these movies, I knew she had to be the one to join me. I figured she'd have a much more interesting perspective than someone my age who'd probably never seen them and would just be watching them out of curiosity for the podcast. And I was correct, probably too correct, because what I assumed would be like an hour-long podcast somehow turned into a 3-hour conversation, talking about her memories watching these with her siblings, the history of the franchise, and the increasingly complicated and convoluted lore as the series went on. So sit back, relax, and get ready for almost 2.5 hours of Tinkerbell with me and Katie Fabrick. I guess before we get into the movies, can you tell me your familiarity with this series? Because for me, this is the first time I've ever watched any of these.
Yeah.
Like, I was aware of them as they were coming out, but I think I was in college. So they weren't something that I or my family watched. I knew they existed, but never had an opportunity, or I didn't even really care to watch them. They didn't look that interesting. Like, I was already, I don't know how, like, if I would describe myself as a huge Disney fan at that point, but I was aware that the Disney direct-to-video movies weren't that great. I don't think I would have. Well, I mean, by that point, I probably was derisively calling them the cheap quills. So this probably would have fallen into that. Like, I feel like this is kind of the last gasp of the direct-to-video stuff that Disney was doing.
Yeah.
Because I think at this point, this was supposed to be like a direct-to-video thing. I think these all did end up going to theaters.
Oh, did they?
I think so. I think the first couple had a more limited run, but like this was the point where John Lasseter came in and he like killed the direct-to-video line. This is the only one that really survived, but he wanted it fully retooled.
Okay.
But yeah, how old were you when this came out, and how many of these were you watching as they came out? Were you like a huge fan?
So the way I ended up watching most of these is I was in my mid-teens when these came out, and they weren't ever really on my radar until the second one came out, because I had a sibling who was 4 and saw Tinkerbell. It was like, I love Peter Pan, and I'm gonna grab the one with Tinkerbell on. And so we actually rented the second one first, and we were just like, oh, it's just the Tinkerbell spin-off direct-to-DVD movie. We didn't realize that, like, there was a first one. And so we watched the second one, and my sibling fell in love with it, like, full-blown. We watched it so many times. Eventually, with, like, Netflix, we watched it so many times. We found out about the first one. We watched that one. I had seen every single one. And then, like, as my sibling got older, I had other siblings who had watched it with them. So, like, they started loving it. So I watched Tinkerbell for, like, the good run of the entirety of it so many times, because just, like, all my siblings all, like, fell in love with it, and they all had their favorites. And so we would watch more than others. And then I had seen everyone more than once, probably more than, like, 4 times before, except the last one, because at that point, all of my siblings had gotten too old or just weren't interested in that anymore, and they all collectively agreed that the last one was the worst one. So I never got to see that one.
Really? I thought they
Yeah.
kept getting better as the series went on.
Yeah. Like I'll dive more into my thoughts about each one, but it was really funny because like I had never seen that last one
Okay.
because they watched that one without me, and then everyone was like, we don't like that one. I think it's just because it didn't have like the characters they liked
Mm,
the most in it.
that is true. It was a lot different than the others, which is partly why I liked it so much better.
Like there are a lot of fan favorite characters in my family growing up, and like we do regularly quote a lot of lines from the ones that we watch. Like I'm rewatching it and I'm like, oh my gosh, I forgot this was a quote from a Tinkerbell movie, like because it just became part of our vocabulary at this point, and none of us remembered where it was from.
Oh,
Just like and like I watched a few of my the first sibling of mine that got into it with them, and they're just like, "Oh no, like just we could perfectly quote a line exactly on time to when it was going to happen." We were like, "Okay," and then three, two, one, snail goes, "Ah!" we're like, we're just like we could perfectly quote very specific scenes, and it was like funny because we're like, oh yeah, here comes the snail. The snail's in it for like 2 seconds, but we're like, I remember that that was somebody like the person just loved seeing the snail and thought it was the most funniest thing in the entire movie. So like we all remember the snail, even though the snail had nothing to do with it. So it's really funny watching that and like knowing exactly how a specific thing is going to happen, even though I haven't watched these movies in a very long time. And I guess they're nostalgic to me, not because I actively sought them out. I thought they were fine, but because I had so many siblings who all went through the steps of loving them. I think my review of all the Tinkerbell movies, or they're all like harmless fun
uh-huh.
that it's not a chore to sit through most of the time.
I think I feel pretty much the exact same way.
And some of them are better than others.
Yes.
Some of them I'm like, why? Like, I do know because I was like watching all of them again. I'm like, I probably would never watch some of these again. I might like even if I got the urge, I'd be like, oh yeah, remember that movie? Yeah, I'm pretty content with never watching it again. But like, it's not that I'm upset that I've watched them or I'm
Hmm.
like revisiting a movie I loved and I'm like, oh my gosh, why did I love that? And so they're just like, they're pretty basic, but they have enough plot and character and story that's going on that you just sit down and like can kind of turn your brain off for a bit. It's not asking for a lot of you to invest a lot into it. So
Hmm.
you can just kind of like it can be a bit of a relief. And I think that's something I miss from direct to DVD films. A lot of them usually have that to them where they're not really asking a lot from you.
Hmm.
So, like, you can be like, oh my gosh, I love, like Del Toro's Pinocchio, but that movie makes me so sad that I can't watch it all the time.
Hmm.
But like the Tinkerbell movies, like if they personally I enjoyed them more, I think that they're fine. But like if I really was into them, I'd be like, I could watch this movie just to sit down and be calm and know that it's not asking a lot from me. And I think that that's a reason why a lot of the older kids and the younger kids, and as the younger kids like grew up and they became the older kids and then younger and then the new wave of younger kids, and that's like why it kind of like connected with a lot of people no matter their age or their gender, and we all could just like sit down and watch it
Hmm.
because it was very harmless and it wasn't like aimed towards really anything, and it had a complex enough world that it wasn't like boring,
Hmm.
so that you could kind of have an enjoyment. You got to see the characters again. So most of the time, if you had a character that you enjoyed in the last movie, you could see them again, and maybe they don't do anything, but you're like, oh, there's the character I loved. Everyone would kind of have their favorite character, and then you could all like be like, yay, here comes my favorite part because I love Silver Mist and she shows up and she's funny, and so you've got like everyone can collect it, but like there's no character who's too annoying that you are like, ugh, I just can't put up with that character most of the time. Usually, like, they're at best like you're like, they're okay. Like that, I mean, at the worst, at best they're okay. No, at the worst they're all right. But usually they're not in it very much, and I think majority of the characters aren't in it very much.
Are you talking about Bobble and Clank?
See, Bobble and Clank, if this was the first time I watched it, they would be the most annoying things because they just don't do anything. But they were huge, especially amongst my brothers.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So, like, I don't hate them. I think that it was a good choice to kind of make them dwindle as the movies go on. Like, if they were in it more, but I think they're fine. I could be a bit biased too because I love Rob Paulson and Jeff Bennett, and I think that it's always just fun to hear them.
Yeah, I thought the same thing, but I didn't love the characters, especially
Yeah,
I liked Bobble a lot better than Clank.
yeah. Like they can get a bit irritating. And I appreciate that they're really not in it very much. And I think that's the thing. Like you
Mhm.
start getting annoyed with a character a bit and then they leave and you're like, okay, we're good. You know? Like they don't get to that point of I can't watch this movie because I find this character so annoying. And you're
Uh-huh.
like, just get off the screen. You're like, okay, that scene's finally over. We can keep going now.
Mhm. I feel like I don't want to say like the biggest problem because I don't know that other than the fact that it's kind of direct to video quality, I don't feel like these are bad.
Hmm.
They're just fine. But I feel
Yeah.
like the biggest problem that I see is that these are very movie by committee, maybe would be a good way of putting
Yeah.
it. There's not really one person who has a singular vision. Like they loved Tinkerbell and they loved the world of the fairies and they wanted to make this huge franchise based around that.
Yeah.
It might have started that way, but like there's too many people coming in and like it was rewritten so many times.
Yeah, there's a lot of retconning and lore going on.
I was noticing that as they went on.
It's like you can't think too hard about how everything works. And then
Yes.
like they introduce like I was talking about how I hadn't seen the first one in a while and I'm like, there's no other Dust Keeper fairies except for Terrence in the first film. And like the first film almost gives you the impression that he's the only Dust Keeper fairy. And
I
then
wouldn't have,
suddenly
I
there's
watched that
an
one first, so I wouldn't have noticed that until if I went back, maybe I would notice. But you're
yeah,
right. Yeah. Because that really got fleshed out more and more as the series went on.
yeah, like suddenly you realize that, oh, it's not just one guy running the entire thing, it's like an entire corporation handing out pixie dust all of a sudden. I don't know what they were up to. Maybe the machines were broken that day and just he was the only one, or everyone was going out and partying or something. It was the day off and he's the unlucky one who had to still work. But it is a little like, where are they? And then like the whole winter fairy thing, like the first movie, they fly through the winter area
Oh,
and they're
they
like, it's
did?
yeah, like they're like showing off the different seasons and like, and this is the cold one, brr, and you're like, yep, okay, we're gonna retcon that hard in the next few movies.
It would be like I'm not going to go back and rewatch these, but it would be interesting to go back, having now seen the whole series. Because like the first half of these I watched a few weeks ago. I thought I was going to get through them all while I was sick, and then I had too many other things going on, and I
Hmm.
only finished the last bunch yesterday and today. So it would be interesting to go back and watch the ones that I watched a few weeks ago, having just watched the ones where I would assume the majority of the retconning is taking place.
Yeah.
As I kept seeing things, I was like, wait a minute, didn't they say this in this other film and now they're doing this? That doesn't
Yeah.
make sense.
Yeah, like I think the retcons really just like really pick up in the third because like it's like they have this summer camp and it's like
That was the first thing that I noticed because I watched that one a few weeks ago too, and I watched it
mhm.
right after having watched the others. I was like, wait a minute, I thought they weren't allowed to go to the
Yeah, it's
mainland.
like did they just go to did they just go to summer camp without the Tinker Fairies? Like did the Tinker Fairies just not are they not invited to the summer camp because that's are we just gonna brush over that? Okay, yeah. Okay.
There was a lot
Like,
of seemingly very arbitrary rules about who was and was not allowed to do certain things.
yeah. I remember in like the pirate fairy, she gets fired from being a dust keeper fairy. And I'm like, so wait a minute, what happens to a fairy once they get fired? Because like their entire life revolves around this talent of theirs. Like, do
Uh-huh.
you become a hobo fairy? Like, is there an entire area of just fired fairies that just can't no longer have a purpose in life? Can
Now I
you
want a movie about a hobo fairy.
like I'm just so it was like, no, no, don't think because this is a direct to DVD movie
Yeah, yeah.
which is created to sell dolls. Like, don't think too hard. And it is very blatant, like that this is a created to sell dolls to kids. Like it wants to be the Barbie kind of a Disney thing,
Uh-huh.
where it's like you each get your own little characters and they're all where they're different. It's kind of like My Little Pony in that sense, where you have your different characters who each have a different talent
Each one has a
and
different color.
different color scheme exactly, and you can collect them and they get different outfits for different movies, so now you get to have more little dolls and all that kind of stuff. So like it's very transparent, I think, about that, and I guess that's kind of why I kind of probably am a bit more lenient towards it. I'm not saying that, oh, a mass marketed movie for kids, but to an extent they didn't have to make a story be cohesive. Like it could have been
Hmm.
far worse, I guess.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
like I understand what it is, and for what it isn't bad. There are better like things that are created, in my opinion, to just like sell toys. Like I like the Transformers franchise, not the Michael Bay movies, but the I like the Transformers franchise and I watch some of their cartoons and stuff. And obviously it's just there to sell you a toy. But, it's like when you take that concept and you turn it into a story, I appreciate that, like, yeah, you're blatantly just trying to sell me toys, but
You're doing it well.
you're doing it well. And I appreciate the creativity that you put behind it instead of just it being it's all a commercial, but I appreciate you knowing that my time is important to
Uh-huh.
make this commercial enjoyable.
That's probably why I didn't feel like this was terrible. Because I
Mm-hmm.
know this is the kind of thing that a lot of people would watch and say, this is horrible. But I've watched a lot of things that are actually horrible
Yeah.
doing all my various podcasts, especially like with all the versions of Alice in Wonderland that I've seen
Mm-hmm.
for every version ever. Like there are ones that people make purely because somebody said they had to make something and they put the bare minimum effort into it.
Mm-hmm.
Terrible character design, really cheap animation. This somebody cared enough to make an actual good movie out of. Not that it's
Yeah.
like amazing and it's not like Pixar level, but it's good enough that you can watch this and you're not looking at your watch wondering how much time is left on this thing.
Yeah.
It goes by pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit forgettable, but like while you're watching, it's not a chore.
Yeah.
I guess we can go through some of the cast because I found the cast a bit interesting, especially for
Mm-hmm.
the main fairies and especially for the first movie. There was some recasts that happened
Yeah.
like as the series went on, some people left. But to start out with, you have Mae Whitman as Tinkerbell. Had you seen Mae Whitman in anything else?
Um, I think she's in The Last Airbender.
Okay.
I think she's been in a couple cartoons, like voice work that I've watched.
Hmm.
So, but like I'm not like hugely familiar with her.
The thing that I was most familiar with her was she was in a show called Good Girls.
Uh-huh.
Had I ever talked about, I know I talked about that with somebody. Was that you or
I
was it
th
somebody
it's
else?
that it's the one about like women and they decide they're gonna like steal or something, right?
Yes. Well, it's complicated. They end up I think
Okay.
they rob a grocery store first because they all have like various money troubles and they're like all desperate, like desperately desperate, and they have no other choice. So they
Mm-hmm.
rob this grocery store, but a bunch of stuff happens and they end up getting roped into basically becoming counterfeiters and they basically become organized criminals.
Okay.
And she's one of the main three. And I really like her in that show. Like I liked the show, but it was one of those shows where it wasn't as bad as Breaking Bad, but it gave me that kind of
Uh,
anxiety watching
yeah.
it because they're doing terrible things. There's terrible things happening. And even though it was like kind of a comedy, it was also it was a comedy drama, but they leaned a lot more
Hmm.
heavily into drama at points. But the cast was fantastic, and Mae Whitman was great. And that's the main place that I know her from. So it was interesting to see her go from a criminal grocery store robbing counterfeiter organized criminal to
Yeah.
Tinkerbell.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, I know her from Avatar: The Last Airbender because she plays Katara. So
Hmm.
that's where I know her from. So that's not a huge jump for me, but that is funny that she's also like that. That'd be so weird, like watching like an MA live action TV show. It's just like I'm Tinkerbell. You're like ah. Like I'm assuming. I mean, maybe she does sound very different, but I'm gonna assume she doesn't. So like that just be really. I've always find it funny when you're watching something randomly, and you've heard this voice for so long, and then you actually see the person in a thing,
Mm.
and you're like, whoa, like oh my gosh, that's weird.
I feel like I'm going to look at her IMDb because I feel like I was looking at her IMDb a few weeks ago and there was something on it that surprised me. Something from like when she was a kid, because she was a child actress, I believe.
Hmm.
Oh, she was the little girl in Independence Day. I think she was the president's daughter.
Oh, okay. I have never seen that, but
She was also the child in a movie that my cousins really love called A Season for Miracles. It was like a Hallmark Hall of Fame movie.
uh-huh.
Yeah, I think that was what the thing that jumped out at me. It's weird to find out that somebody you're watching now was somebody you knew way back when in a movie when they were a little kid.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Well, other than Mae Whitman, another person who lasted through the whole series was Raven
Yeah.
as Iridessa. I don't know if they like there was a lot of Disney synergy going on here, so I don't know if she was given this role because she was that so Raven, but I like that she's in it. I really like Raven. So anything that she's in, it's always puts it up another notch in my book because I just like her as a
Hmm.
person.
Yeah, she's fun.
I love her voice.
Yeah.
She never has a huge role in any of these, but it's nice that she's there.
Yeah.
And then Lucy Liu as Silver Mist.
Hmm.
I think she would, those three are the three that last through the whole series. There's other like side characters that do as well, but those three are the three main ones. I guess you could also count Pamela Adlon as Vidya. Like
Yeah.
she started out as an antagonist, but by the end of the series, she was one of the main friend fairies. So I guess she lasted through the whole series.
Hmm.
But Kristen Chenoweth also was here at the beginning as Rosetta, and she ended up getting replaced halfway through. I'm gonna guess it wasn't so much being replaced as she got too famous and had too many other things to do.
Yeah.
And then the one who lasted the least amount of time was America Ferrera, who played Fawn, the animal fairy. She was in the
Hmm.
first movie and then none of the others.
And then every other side character was voiced by Jeff Bennett and Rob Paulson. I kid, but there was like you'd be like, "Oh, hi, Rob Paulson."
There
Oh,
was a
hi, Jeff.
large amount of side characters or one-off characters that I could tell were somebody who was elsewhere in the movie as well. So it was
Yeah.
like they're saving money by using who they already have.
Hmm.
But I mean, if you have Rob Paulson and Jeff Bennett, you might as well use
Yeah.
them to the best of their abilities.
Right. Exactly.
Another name that jumps out at me is Jane Horrocks as Fairy Mary, who was in several of them.
Hmm.
The only reason that she jumps out to me is because she played Babs in Chicken Run. Otherwise, I'm not familiar with the name, but I think she's an English comedian. So,
Mm.
and then I guess sort of famous is Jesse McCartney as Terrence.
Yes.
He was probably another one of those Disney synergy things
Yeah.
because he was in some other Disney things, and he might did he have a contract with Disney for like music? I know he did music, but I don't know if he was one of those Disney kids or not.
Ah.
He contributed music to a bunch of Disney things either way, whether
Yeah.
on on a contract with them.
I'm not sure. I do know he's very heavy like that Disney kid, but yeah, I don't know if it was contracted to Disney because like when you like turned on the Disney Channel, I don't quite remember ever having like a Jesse McCartney music video, but I could have just missed it because I didn't watch the Disney Channel that much.
Hmm. I know he was in one or two of those Disney Mania albums.
Mm, okay.
I don't know if you ever listened to those or not. You were probably the perfect age for those. I think I was probably older than the target audience, but I loved those.
Yeah, I think I missed that because like I only knew a very select few of things of Disney Channel.
The Disney Mania albums were, I don't know when they started. Let me look that up. The Disney Mania albums were pop redos of a bunch of
Oh,
Disney music.
I may have listened to some of that. Okay, yeah. I 100% had at least one of these.
The first one was 2002. So I would have been mid-teen. So I guess I was sort of the target audience when it started, but I definitely wasn't by the time it ended. But every time a new one came out, I had to buy it because I loved I as with other things, I love when people do different versions of things, and that extends to music, not just movies. So I was always interesting to see how they were going to put a new spin on different Disney songs.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I got like one, like someone gave me one CD and I just had one of them. I remember listening to it a lot.
Jesse McCartney's first contribution was to Disney Mania 2, and he did the second star to the right. So that ties in nicely.
Yeah.
On the third one, he did When You Wish Upon a Star. He did a remix of Second Star to the Right for the remix album. Oh, that's right. He did I'll Try for the Return to Neverland soundtrack.
Mm.
So he's like all over Peter Pan stuff.
Yeah, I think the first time I ever ran into Jesse McCartney, because weirdly he's been like in a lot of things that I didn't actively search for him, but he would just pop up. Is I watched Ella Enchanted, and he is one of the singing voices for like the final song.
Oh, okay.
Like when they all sing, like the prince isn't actually singing in that scene. It's Jesse McCartney. So like that's yeah. So like that's not actually I believe Anne Hathaway didn't sing the last song either. I think because they weren't sure she could sing. She sings the Queen song, but she doesn't sing the final song. I
Hmm.
can't remember, but I remember Jesse McCartney was the Prince's lines of that final song.
Okay.
And then as I was getting older and I got into video games, he's in the Disney video game series Kingdom Hearts. So
Okay.
like, and then he was in Tinkerbell. So like, I was like, and then he was on some of my DVD, my CDs. So I was like, wow, this is Jesse McCartney everywhere. I got when I was a kid, I got this like weird dance mat thing because like dance mats were all the rage. Basically, you put a CD into it, and then you would have to like do these dance things on the mat. And at the end, they're like, "Okay, now make up your own dance moves to this Jesse McCartney song."
Is this the Dance Dance Revolution game, or is this something different?
It was something different. I don't think it survived. I can't remember what it's called either, but it was a very strange mat. Like it made no sense, and I never could do any of the dances because of how far apart everything was. I don't know if it's made for someone way taller than me or not, and that could very well have been, but I could not reach anything. I could not do any of the dances. But I would pop in that CD and skip every single learning track and just listen to this song. And then like I don't know because I wasn't even that big a fan of the song. It was just like I had a song that was just mine. So I was like, I'm gonna just listen to my Jesse McCartney song. It's not very good. I'm sorry. It's not my style of music. But I just remember like really listening to that song. Yeah, so weirdly Jesse McCartney has been in things. Okay, so it was Anne Hathaway who sang Don't Go Breaking My Heart with Jesse McCartney.
Okay.
So she sang it, but the Prince didn't.
Who played the Prince? It's been so long since I've seen that.
Oh gosh. Yeah, sorry, we're complete tangent. Hugh Dancy.
Okay. I guess getting back to Tinkerbell.
Yes. Sorry, I just ranted about Jesse McCartney for a while.
That's fine.
Although my I no offense to Jesse McCartney, but like my interest in like him is like, oh yeah, he's that guy who shows up and stuff, and then that's kind of it. Like, I have nothing against Jesse McCartney. It's just funny that he just shows up, and I'm like, oh, there he is again.
I think that maybe what he has, I don't want to say that's what he's become, but I think he is more transitioned to doing small and voice roles
Hmm.
rather than being a big star. Because I think years ago, he might have been considered like a big star in like the teen circles, like the Disney Channel fan circles.
Yeah,
But I feel like he's more doing voice acting now. Like you said, Kingdom Hearts, like video games and other
yeah,
animated projects. I think he does that a lot more than he does anything else.
which is cool. Voice acting's awesome.
Yeah, if you're going to be like in movies, I would say voice acting is the way to go.
Oh yeah, I forgot he was in Young Justice
Oh, that's right. I forgot. Yeah.
because he plays my favorite Nightwing slash Robin.
Yeah.
Yeah, so again, everywhere. Surprisingly, just everywhere. But surprisingly not in Tinkerbell that much.
Yeah, because when I looked at the cast and I looked at how many he was in, I expected him to be a main character. And then as I was watching the last movie, I was thinking, he hasn't really been in these, has he?
Yeah, he was very prominent in the first like two, and then like the third one, he's like, I'm kind of here, and then he just drops off the face of the earth.
He came in, recorded a line, and then left.
Exactly, like literally in Pirate Fairy, he has one sentence. I assume he was like recording something else for Disney, and they're like, could you just like say the letter Y real quick? And he's like, why? And they're like, perfect, we got it, okay. And then they just like pop that into the Pirate Fairy, and you're like, okay, there we go.
We can put him on the poster now. The only other big name, at least from the first one, is Angelica Houston, who played Queen Clarion.
Hmm.
I think she was in most of the movies. She might have not been in one or two, but like she was kind of someone who was in the background of everything.
Yeah, she'd show up and be like, "Oh goodness, what happened?" And they're just like, "Oh, Queen." And then she was like, "We'll fix it. Goodbye." Um,
Kind of.
yeah.
Well, I guess before we go into what the movie is about, I did write down a bunch of behind the scenes stuff
Hmm.
because this movie went through a lot before it actually was able to come out. It apparently had at least 24 scripts and multiple directors before they landed on what actually became the movie. The early draft was called Tinkerbell and the Ring of Belief, and there was actually promotional material made for a movie with that title. And it apparently revolved around Tinkerbell and her friends traveling to the mainland to restore children's belief in fairies,
Okay.
which sounds really like a like all of these are very corporate movies, but this that really sounds like something that a suit made up. And the first movie was also originally going to show how Tinkerbell met Peter Pan,
Okay.
and Captain Hook, the pirates, and the Lost Boys were all supposed to be featured as well.
Okay.
And apparently they even had some trailers that were in a few DVDs that were released. I'm not sure when those came out, and it doesn't say what movies they were, but it was originally promoted as going to be released in 2007, which obviously that did not happen.
Yeah.
And then a bunch of things happened. Apparently, 90% of the film was completely scrapped, and it was delayed to 2008 with an entirely new storyline.
Huh.
According to a June 2007 article in Variety, Sharon Morrill, the head of Disney Toon's direct-to-DVD division since 1994, was removed from her position due to problems with this film, including a budget that had expanded to almost $50 million
Wow.
for a direct-to-video movie. And this is the point when John Lasseter and Ed Catmull were given leadership of Walt Disney Feature Animation
Mm.
after Disney purchased Pixar. And even though Disney Toons was not under their management, they apparently got really involved in the movies. I think that's about the time where they basically scrapped all of the ones that were in development except for this. Because I
Yeah.
remember back in the day. I don't remember what it was, but I know I watched a movie, and before the movie, there was a preview for Dumbo 2.
Okay.
So something, I'm sure that was one of the ones that he scrapped because at some point there was going to be a Dumbo 2 and then it was canceled, which is probably for the best.
Yeah.
We
It's
did
like, oh
not need a
no.
Dumbo 2.
Oh no. Too bad. Oh well.
Apparently, at the time, Lasseter said that the Tinkerbell movie was virtually unwatchable and it would have
Mm,
hurt both Walt Disney Feature Animation and Disney Consumer Products line. So Morrill was moved to special projects, and the status of the movie was in doubt. And Disney Observer Jim Hill reported at the time that complications surrounding the film had resulted in the decision that Disney would no longer produce straight to DVD sequels to its feature films, which also led to later sequels to Tinkerbell seeing a theatrical release. I think they were more limited than what you would get with a normal movie, but they did end up in theaters,
okay.
which I don't think that they ended up in theaters around me. I feel like it was too limited to get to
Yeah.
my small town because I don't remember these being theatrical. I, I remember thinking of them as direct to DVD movies.
Yeah, because like the first time I started watching them was first I rented them from the library and then Netflix came along. So like
Hmm.
we watched them on Netflix when they came out because they steadily showed up on Netflix. So that's like we would watch them as they came out on Netflix. So I thought they were just like direct to DVD slash streaming, but I guess they went to theaters.
I feel like, especially for the first one, but for the most part, most of this series, this felt more like a show than a movie.
Hmm.
Like it felt like maybe a long episode of a cartoon that you would find on the Disney Channel,
Yeah.
which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it didn't really feel like a movie.
No, like I feel like if I had seen it in the theaters, I'd be more disappointed in it.
Mm, yeah.
Because like going to the theaters, and that's not to say that like I don't have some direct to DVD films that I wouldn't love to see in the theaters, but like going to the theaters takes up a lot of hyping for myself personally. Like I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go out, I'm gonna sit in the dark with a bunch of strangers. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be a really loud movie. I can do this because I just really want to watch because like watching the movie for me has to be worth it to go into the theaters. And so like if I had gone in there and I walked out and I had just watched like Tinkerbell, I would have been like, yeah, that was not worth me having to like hype myself up. And I'd be like, I couldn't hype myself up to go to the theaters to see Tinkerbell.
Hmm. Well, the first movie is basically an origin story for Tinkerbell, which I guess makes sense, but I feel like, and this is the thing with the entire series, it does not feel like the same character from Peter Pan.
No, she seems very different. It has like a soft reboot
Yeah.
vibe to it. It feels like it's in the same world, but it is not it's a different take on that world.
Hmm. I did read that they were eventually planning on having her meet Peter Pan.
Mm,
Like, I think it would have been movie 8 because the series was canceled after the sixth movie.
yeah.
But I still wonder how that would have worked. And would they have said that this is canon to the Peter Pan films? Because this character is so different than the Tinkerbell and Peter Pan. Because the Tinkerbell and Peter Pan, like, I'm not going to say she's evil, but she can be nasty.
Oh yeah,
She's
no.
not a nice person.
No, she really leans into that original idea of fairies being little like annoyances.
Yeah.
Like they're little tricky annoyances.
Uh-huh. And this one, she's just sweet and kind and curious and inventive and a completely different character.
No, definitely. She's way more like protagonist and like, she'll listen to people most of the time and stuff. I think like with the second one they try to lean more into her like getting all red in the face and stuff, but like that quickly fades away
Hmm.
from like her anger controls her and it's like but like in the second movie she learns to deal with that so like it never becomes an issue again because they live in an ideal ideal world where if you have a problem once and you find the solution, it never becomes a problem again.
Well, I think the way they start this out, it's been so long since I've read Peter Pan, but I feel like there's a passage that talks about fairies being born, like when a newborn baby laughs for the first time,
Yeah.
its laugh breaks into 1,000 pieces and each piece becomes a fairy, something
Yeah,
like
so
that.
yeah, along those lines, yeah.
So they're kind of going with that, except in this version, when the baby laughs, the laugh becomes a fairy. It's not like the laugh breaks up and becomes 1,000 fairies or whatever. It's
Yeah.
just each baby's laugh is a fairy, which
Yeah.
they retcon in a later movie, but we'll get to that. But they have her being born and flying from the real world to Neverland. Then she has like a ceremony that is basically the fairy version of the Harry Potter sorting hat ceremony. They have all of these things that like she has to choose one or it chooses her or something like a hammer glows for her. So that means that she's a Tinker Fairy,
Yeah.
which that is canon to the novel too. It in the book, that's what she's described as, a Tinker Fairy. So everything that she does, as far as like the inventive stuff, it technically does come from the book, even though her as a character is very different. That idea of her being a Tinker Fairy does come from the book.
Hmm.
And in the book, one of the things that I wrote down was she was described as one of the fairies who mended pots and kettles. That also begs the question. So she's named Tinkerbell because she's a Tinker Fairy, but why aren't all the other fairies named after their professions?
Yeah, why isn't it Tinker Bobble and
Yeah.
Tinkler Clank? Come on. I mean, I guess like because like then it'd be fast flying Vidya, which is ridiculous.
I also have questions about like why fast flying? Why is that a specific
Yeah, it's
profession?
like my favorite like everyone feels almost kind of like elements, you know, you've got like nature, you've got water, you've got light, and then you've got animal fairy, which is kind of in the similar vein. Tinkers pushing it and then just fast it's like it's fast flying. And you're like, you didn't want to call like wind fairies? Like
That
because they
that
can control the
that
wind.
really confused me because I assumed because she controls the wind, I assumed that fast flying was just what they called weather fairies. But then in a later thing, you've got storm fairies, and I was like, what?
Yeah.
So why is that different than from what Vidya is?
Like what does Vidya contribute besides flying fast?
Exactly. There was so many times where I had to stop myself and I was like, you are way overthinking this.
Yeah,
But also
it's
that's the
like you
point of
think
this.
it's like you're thinking about this world they've created too much, yet it has enough lore that it causes you to think about it
Yes,
too much.
exactly.
It's not like I'm overthinking a simple thing that you didn't need to think about that. Like if you think about like Pokemon and you're like, well, how does this thing work? And it's like, well, it's a Pokemon world. You don't have to think too much about that. Like all Pokemon come from eggs. That's just a rule. And you're like, but some of them are mammal like, and you're like, don't worry about it. Just all Pokemon from eggs. That's just you overthinking it a bit because they are fictional animal creatures. But then, like, in this, they're like, well, this is how this thing works. And you're like, but wait, that's not exactly how it works exactly. And you're like, but I'm thinking too much. It's a balance of too much lore, but not enough lore.
Yeah. Especially as the series went on and lore started to seem to contradict itself.
Yeah.
One of the first big questions I had was after she's become a Tinker Fairy and she's like getting into things, she finds out that she's not allowed to go to the mainland. So she decides to try and change what kind of fairy she is into another kind of fairy so that she can go to the mainland.
Hmm.
But like, why? Why is she not allowed to go to the mainland?
Yeah, like why can't she just come with them?
Yeah. It was like this hard and fast rule, like you can't break this rule. Tinker fairies are not allowed to go to the mainland. But why? And I think somebody realized that that was a dumb rule because that was quickly retconned before the end of the movie, really, because by the end of the movie, she does go to the mainland. But like, why did they let her if this was a rule that you're not allowed to?
Yeah, it's not like they were like, no, we only can have like maybe Tinker Fairies just don't blend into scenery as well or something. So like it's like you could jeopardize the discovery of fairies. No, it's just Tinker Fairies don't do anything when they go to the mainland, so they can't go. You're not worth it. You're not worth the pixie dust to get there.
That was another thing. Why is pixie dust a limited resource?
It's so funny because in the first movie it just kind of feels like it's a magical thing, and then just like immediately in the second movie it's like, no, we have to ration it. You already got your quarter of the pixie dust for the day. It's kind of felt more like, oh, the pixies, like the fairies have to go and like brush up and get a little bit more pixie dust every so often. That like it was like it didn't require a lot of thought. They just went and they like got like a touch up of pixie dust, and they would just go up there, they get it poured on their head, and then now. But then like immediately they're just like, no, we have this organized system of how you're supposed to get your pixie dust and when you get it, what day, how much you have to get depending on what you do. We have to sneak out pixie dust. Like it's like, what happened?
I suppose I should probably wait until we get to the second movie, but like I had so many questions about the rules for pixie dust and why it worked like this. Which again, I'm probably overthinking it, but like that's the point of the podcast is to think about things. And a lot of people are going to watch this and they really will overthink it because like most worlds like this have some sort of lore that someone has come
Yeah.
up with. But with the Tinkerbell movies, it feels like they just made it up as they went.
Yeah, it's very straight ahead lore is what I call it. Like they don't have set rules planned out they have such a vast world that they don't really have a lot of plans going on, and they're like, well, that wasn't actually really a rule. Like it wasn't that big of a deal, so we could probably just kind of like scoot around it and like create new lore that contradicts it because we had this idea for a story about trying to meet a winter fairy when it's not allowed. Like, and they're like, we never really brought up the winter fairies, so it's basically fine. And it's like, it's very like we came up with an idea as we go along, as opposed to we have a world that has all these rules that we have to follow those rules,
Hmm.
and we can't break them, but we can create stories within that world. It's more of a world that shifts and adapts as they come up with a new idea for a story and a new conflict.
Yeah. Yeah, it felt like the lore changed with the movie. Like every time they got a new movie, the lore had to adapt to the story that they were trying to tell.
I think the biggest issue with that kind of storytelling, especially when you have this society that runs on these rules that supposedly have been going around for thousands and thousands of years, and yet a lot of these things are taught like they're completely new and no one's ever heard about it before. It's like,
I
oh yeah,
feel,
this is the new thing.
I feel like we should probably get into that in a later movie, but it almost feels like there were two different fairy societies, and the one that they're in now is recent. I'm not like again, I'm probably overthinking it, but different things that they said made me think that the way things work now is very recent to the fairy people.
Yeah.
I don't know. And that's probably something that they didn't even think about when they were writing certain lines that made me think that. But I, again, I'm probably overthinking it, but they should have overthought it before they wrote it.
Yeah, we are overthinking it, but also this is probably stuff that for future writers out there, this is probably stuff that you should be conscious of
Yeah.
and think about as you write your story, that there are rules to a fictional fantasy world that if your audience will notice if you have your main characters fly to the winter world in the first movie and then you make a whole movie where you're not allowed to ever even think about touching the winter world.
This is why a lot of people, when they start a series like this, they will come up with a series Bible. They
Mm-hmm.
will write all of their rules in advance for how things work, and then they will go off of that for not just the first movie, but thinking and planning ahead. But
Yeah.
with this, I I can just pretty much guarantee that they did not have a series Bible for this series.
Yeah, I think it definitely does feel like the very first movie was not planned. It was like maybe it will go out into a series, but like the initial thought process wasn't to turn this into a large thing. It was a bit more of whilst it was like it can bloom into a series, it wasn't thinking too much about how other movies would be able to operate within the world. It was thinking more about how the world operates in this one specific movie.
It probably was a case of they were planning one movie to be one
Mm-hmm.
of their direct-to-video things. And I think it probably was more successful than they were expecting
Mm-hmm.
because even though, like I said, the budget had ballooned to like $50 million, they did have a brief theatrical release,
Mm-hmm.
which ended with almost $10 million, according to Wikipedia. And like, I don't know how accurate all of the numbers are, but according to Wikipedia, it was almost $10 million from
Mm-hmm.
just the theatrical release. And then DVD sales were over $50 million, and it
Mm-hmm.
sold 22% higher than it was estimated to.
Yeah.
So it did better than they thought it was going to, which probably meant that's why they greenlit the sequel.
Yeah.
But yeah, the rest of the plot of the first movie was pretty simple, with her trying to change her what kind of fairy she is, and eventually she gets tricked by Vidya and accidentally causes some kind of apocalyptic disaster with something called sprinting thistles, which are these plants that run around.
Yeah.
And because she's a Tinker Fairy, she invents ways to fix the mistakes that she's made. She accidentally, like, somehow destroyed spring with these sprinting thistles, but because she invented all these different things to fix her mistakes, she finally is able to accept that she's a Tinker Fairy. And then through all this, for some reason, now she's allowed to go to the mainland. I don't know why. I don't, maybe they said, but I don't remember why they allowed her to go to the mainland.
Yeah, so like the whole reason I think is why they decided to let Tinker Fairies go is because they're like, well, we have all this stuff that gets washed up on shore that comes from the mainland that probably means something to someone. So I think their whole idea was that like whenever you like lose something and then you suddenly find it, that's what Tinker Fairies are doing, even though that doesn't have a whole lot to do with tinkering as a concept. Like the idea is they put it back together and give you your lost toy back.
Well, she
But
did have that music box thing that she
yeah,
eventually leaves for apparently Wendy from Peter Pan.
yeah,
So I guess Wendy must have lost the music box, and that's why she brought it to her.
yeah.
I guess that makes about as much sense as a lot of things in the movie.
Yeah, I think they were leaning into that was kind of like that's what Tinker Fairies now do. So, like it's like so whenever you lose a toy and you find it again, it's the Tinker Fairies who left it at your door or whatever. Um, and so like in the first movie, standalone, you're like, oh, okay, so that's what Tinker Fairies do. They find lost things, they put them back together. But then like that's never brought up again. Like
Hmm.
fixing things for people and all that. Never again. The only thing they do with lost things, as they're called, is they just use them in their contraptions so that they can justify why they have gigantic buttons.
They use them in their contraptions. I mean, that's not wrong. That is what they do with them. One thing I did forget to mention, the music for the movie. It starts out with a narrator, but the narrator is also the songwriter and performer for, I'm not sure if you would call it the theme song. It's To the Fairies They
Mm-hmm.
Draw Near. It's sort of a theme song, but they also have Fly to Your Heart by Selena Gomez for more
Yeah.
Disney synergy, which
Mm-hmm.
they continue to do with the rest of the series. But
Yeah.
Lorena McKennitt is the narrator and performer of To the Fairies They Draw Near. And Joel McNeely is the main composer, but also he has a violin soloist, Mayreed Nesbitt, who I know from my family listened to a lot of Celtic music,
Uh-huh.
specifically Celtic Woman, a group of female singers, but also at times Mayreed Nesbitt. She was one of the main featured artists with Celtic Woman with her violin. So I was pleasantly surprised to find that she had a big part in not just the first movie, she's also in the second movie. And then I guess they decided to not go with the Celtic sound, which I think they
Yeah,
should have had more. But I liked that she was in this.
that's cool.
She doesn't do a whole lot of movies, so it's fun to find her in this.
That's neat.
Okay, on to Tinkerbell and the Lost Treasure. So in this one, they decide to expand on the lore of the pixie dust, and they've invented such a complicated. Like as I was watching this, I was like, why do they need to explain all this?
It's so like complex. It's like every blue moon, we need to get blue dust, and then but the only way to get blue dust is if we shine it through a blue moonstone, which we need to create a scepter, and we can't just set it on a table. It has to be, and every year, different fairies have to make one. And surprise, Tinkerbell, it's the Tinker time, and it's your time to shine. And don't smash it. It's the last one. We only have one. Like like it's so funny because like their entire society will just like because like there's many times where the pixie dust tree or just the pixie dust is completely in peril, and it's hilarious because they'll be like, oh no, if there's no more pixie dust we can no longer fly. And it's like, well, yeah, that's a problem, but also in the first movie, they established that the only way for a fairy to be born is for a child to laugh for the first time, and then you sprinkle pixie dust on it. So if you lose your pixie dust, the problem is not flying. The problem is that there will be no more pixies. It's like there will be no more fairies. Your entire like line of like just species is absolutely destroyed if you do not have pixie dust. And the fact that like I understand they don't want to bring that up because they try to not have the characters too in peril because it is a children's movie and they don't want it to go too far, but like that's an established thing, and like it also makes you think too much again. Like they should have backup plans.
I'm so glad you're so familiar with these movies because having only watched every one of them once, I did not remember that that's how the fairies were born. I remember the baby laugh part because that actually comes sort of from the book, but I didn't
Yeah,
remember that they had to sprinkle pixie dust. So you're correct. That would be bad for the entire species.
yeah,
The whole idea of how they get their pixie dust really should not have been a thing. Like they should have just had it be how it is with Tinkerbell in Peter Pan, with her
mm-hmm.
just, I guess, organically making pixie dust. Like she just has pixie dust. It's just part of her.
Yeah,
So to have this whole complicated system where they have to do all of these, I don't want to say it's basically a Rube Goldberg machine to how they get their pixie dust, but it almost is just the magical version of that. It just makes it so much more complicated than it needs to be.
yeah. I think also another thing is with how important pixie dust is to people, that's why they kind of are very strict about it. But also it kind of gives at least the Dust Keeper fairies like this kind of like very controlling aspect of like you can only fly if we say you can have pixie dust, and you only can have so much pixie dust at a specific time. It's like, oh wow, they're like the whimsicalness of a fairy flying with pixie dust suddenly gets this like heavy weight to it, like that yeah, pixies and fairies, they can all fly with like the magical dust, but also like if they have too much dust they'll run out and then there will be no more fairies.
And also, these are questions I started having more in the second one, but like, or I mean, the third one. With the way the pixie dust works, why can't they fly if they don't have it? Because they have wings. And like, you sprinkle pixie dust on just any random thing and it starts floating.
Mhm.
So why do they need it to fly if they have wings, but they can make anything fly if they have pixie dust? But if they have pixie dust, they can't just sprinkle it on themselves. Like, because in the third one, like I should probably save this till we get there, but they get wet and they can't fly if they're wet because their wings they're sopping wet and they're like drooping and they can't use them. But like, why can't they just sprinkle more pixie dust on themselves and float like they do with plates and
Yeah.
bowls?
Like I think also like when they get wet, it's it kind of, we're like, well, maybe it washes the pixie dust off, but if their wings dry off, then they can just fly again. So it's kind of like not exactly doesn't make sense. It was funny because I was watching another movie where a fairy shows up and her powers get stolen with my sibling who's really familiar with the Tinkerbell series. And they're just like, hang on a minute, like their powers just got stolen. Why can they still fly? And I'm like, this is Tinkerbell. Like she still has wings, so she can still fly. Like it was just funny that like we had just watched Tinkerbell and we're watching fairies again. We're like, right, that makes no sense that why the fairies cannot fly
Uh-huh.
because they still have
Exactly.
wings.
Yes. Yeah. Like, I guess I can understand wanting to have a deeper lore to the pixie dust and how they use it, but like making it so that they cannot fly themselves without the pixie
Mm-hmm.
dust, I feel like that almost just breaks fairy rules if fairy rules are a thing because they have wings. Like, what's the point of the wings if they can't use them to
Yeah,
fly?
yeah,
And again, I'm probably overthinking this, but this feels like something that I shouldn't be overthinking. This should just be a thing.
yeah.
I
It
shouldn't.
shouldn't be a problem.
Yes, exactly.
It shouldn't be a problem that we end up overthinking.
Yes. But yeah, like you said, they have this whole complicated thing involving a moonstone, but the moonstone, it's the only one and it's extremely fragile. And as soon as they said that, I was like, well, Tinkerbell's gonna smash that thing. And I was correct. So then the rest of the movie is her going to try and this is another thing that was so ridiculous. There was this magic mirror that grants you three wishes, and according to this legend, there's one wish left in the mirror.
Hmm.
Well, like why does the mirror have limited wishes? Like I can see like genie rules, like every person who finds the magic lamp or whatever the genie's in gets three wishes. Why
Yeah.
is it that there's literally only three wishes, period? So somebody in the past has used this to wish twice, and now she has to find it to use the last wish. Like, why?
I
They
think,
just they made up these arbitrary rules
yeah,
for no reason.
like that arbitrary rule feels like they created it to fix the problem of her just handing the mirror to someone else to fix it if she accidentally used the wrong, like if you only had one wish per person, she
I
could just, they could
suppose,
be like,
but
she could just hand it to somebody. So in order to fix that, it created a whole other arbitrary reason. It's like we fixed it with a different problem. We didn't fix the entirety of the issue.
I guess so, because that is what happens. She ends up accidentally wasting the last wish. And like and also her wish was going to be to fix the stone that she broke. And I was thinking when they first started talking about this wishing the magic mirror, I was like, well, she's going to go find it and wish for unlimited moonstone so they won't have to worry about running out again. But then she was like talking about wishing for the stone to be fixed. I was like, why not wish for more stones? Because then, since they're so fragile, if you break one, you've got backups.
Yeah. I think the reason is that she wants to hide all guilt. Like she doesn't want people to know that she even broke any moonstones. But like, yeah, I think that they would be pretty forgiving if she showed up with like 100 moonstones. They'll
Exactly.
be like, well, you broke one, but at least we have like a bunch now.
I,
Also, like, imagine how much blue pixie dust you could get if you put out 100 moonstones. Like, we
yeah,
would never have this problem again.
yes. And even so, at the end, she still basically gets away with it, but in a much more ridiculous way because it eventually comes out that she's broken the moonstone. But the way they get around that is making it seem like she did it on purpose because she comes up with the idea to build a scepter using all of the shards of the shattered moonstone
Hmm. Yeah,
and passes it off like she did it on purpose because now they get more pixie dust than they've ever had before
yeah.
and everybody thinks she's a genius. But like it was a total accident. So what lesson was learned here?
Yeah. Like, I think the moonstone, like, it didn't play enough into what the lesson was, which is that she, like, needs to control her anger and not get mad at her friend.
Hmm.
And then her friend needed to be so overbearing because So this is one of the ones I've seen a million times because it was the first one I watched, and just it was very popular amongst my family. And I remember being younger and being like, Tinkerbell is in the wrong. Like she needs to calm down. Like
Hmm.
she gets mad too easily and stuff. But then like as I watched it again, I'm like, okay, I still think Tinkerbell does need to calm down a bit. But oh my gosh, Terrence, you need to back off. Like he's like he's just so irritating. And you're like, I get where you're coming from, but also you're just so overbearing. He's like waking her up every morning in the most irritating way. He's whistling all the time and she's trying to concentrate. I do think that it's a very easy problem and they wouldn't have ran into this out like if it was in the real world because they seem like good enough friends where she could say, Terrence, back off a little bit, and he'd be like, oh sorry, and then the problem is fixed. But you can't, I guess you can't make a movie out of that. So
Yeah. It was one of those things where it was really just a problem that exists on screen because like this happens with sitcoms and kids shows in general. Like
uh-huh.
people don't communicate and then they have a fight or whatever or don't talk to each other. And then you have this whole complicated thing that happens that wouldn't have
Yeah.
happened if somebody had just had one line saying what they needed.
Yeah. And I can understand like to an extent, like with kids, the whole point is that, with communication, it could have worked. Like at the end, they do. I did appreciate that it wasn't that one of them was in the wrong. They were both like, yeah, I was overbearing, and yeah, I got too angry, and I shouldn't have snapped. And it's like, well, no, I shouldn't have been such overbearing as well. Like they both were in the wrong, and they both kind of came to the realization. I
Hmm.
appreciated that as opposed to
Yeah.
just being like Tinkerbell was the bad guy or Terrence was the bad guy. Like I
Yeah.
appreciate it was handled like a bit more maturely than that. So like it doesn't annoy me again, like so it doesn't annoy me too much because whilst it's a very generic thing where you're like you could have fixed that with just a little bit of communication,
Hmm.
like I appreciate that it had a more mature ending to the situation than just Tinkerbell had to learn how to control her temper and then that was just the end. It was
Hmm.
more, we're friends, we should have talked about it kind of thing. So like I think that's why it still sits and like it didn't get into irritation for me because they just like talked about it a bit and they're like sorry, sorry, and then they continued on.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, ultimately that was handled better than a lot of other kids shows would do it, but it still was very convoluted.
Oh yeah, yeah, 100%. Like if you do not like overly convoluted, ridiculous lore stuff, like we've been saying this entire time, where you can find many a plot hole, Tinkerbell may very well annoy you to a point. And it is a
Uh-huh.
thing that you can talk to someone about and be like, why is this how it works? Where did these healer fairies come from out of the blue? Like, but I think that, like I said, it's a series that works well to just kind of shut your brain off and just watch a movie where you're not too annoyed with any of the characters.
That's true. I think if I wasn't doing a podcast, I would have shut my brain off. But because I was making notes as I went, I kept
Yeah,
finding things to
yeah,
to question.
exactly.
I guess before we move on to the next one, I forgot to say, even though she's not like a main character, this was the first movie, I believe this is the first movie with Fawn recast, now played by Angela Bardis, who I'm not familiar with. She does not have a very long IMDb page, but it was notable to me because she's taking over for America Ferrera, and her
Hmm.
other big role that I could see, at least on her IMDb page, was she plays Astrid in the video games based on How to Train Your Dragon. And Astrid is played by America Ferrera in the movies.
Oh, okay.
So I guess that's must be like a thing for her, is she's a voice match for America Ferrera.
That's fun.
And also, music-wise, Mary Nesbitt is in this again. This is the only other movie. And then the theme song here was by Demi Lovato, The Gift of a Friend. And again, at least for the next several, the theme songs all seem to be very Disney synergy based. Because like
Yeah.
with the first one, it was Selena Gomez who was in Wizards of Waverly Place, and in
Hmm.
this one, Demi Lovato, I believe at the time would have been either on Sunny with a Chance or maybe just out of it. I'm not sure how the timeline's up, but that would have been the Disney synergy going on here was a tie-in with Sunny with a Chance.
Yeah.
And then with the next one, you get How to Believe by Bridget Mendler, who would have been on Good Luck Charlie at the time.
Hmm.
And the next one is Tinkerbell and the Great Fairy Rescue. And again, with this one and the last one, so many lore-based questions, so many things that feel like plot holes, especially with how this starts out with Tinkerbell is now going to a summer camp for fairies on the mainland. And I was like, what happened to the rule that only certain fairies are allowed to go to the mainland? Why do they now have a camp there? And how
And they
long has
act
this
like
camp been
every
running?
yeah, and they act like, oh yeah, this is the thing we always do. It's
Yeah,
like, hang on a minute, like I guess it's just they were like, we need a reason why they're in the mainland. Summer camp because this is the summer movie because most of the movies are based around one specific season.
well, now that you've explained to me why the first movie ended the way it did with her delivering things that she fixed, why not just do that? Like she's on a mission to give back something to a kid. Like the kid who ends up capturing her. Maybe she had a thing that she lost and Tinkerbell fixed it and was returning it and ended up getting
Mhm.
trapped. I feel like that makes a whole lot more sense than a fairy summer camp.
Yeah, like the summer camp really like you're like, oh, okay, they're at summer camp. What's that got to do with the plot? Nothing at all.
No, it really doesn't.
Like there's no reason why it's a summer camp.
Yeah, exactly. That's just how they end up getting there. And after that, I don't know that the camp is even mentioned.
No, like they when Vidya is like, we gotta go save Tinkerbell, she runs back to the camp, but then like they leave the camp and they like never bring up the camp again. Like
Yeah. But yeah, the whole plot of this movie revolves around Tinkerbell getting captured by a little girl, and this is where Vidya starts changing from antagonist to actually being a friend because she's the one who has to orchestrate the rescue mission because she was there and semi-responsible for Tinkerbell getting captured. And this girl, she lives with her dad, who is like the worst, most obnoxious, unsupportive father ever. He's played by Michael Sheen.
hmm
And everything about this father, I have questions on because, like, okay, so set aside the fact that in this universe, fairies are responsible for basically everything, and scientists are completely wrong about everything. And this guy is a naturalist who is like cataloging butterflies and studying everything, and he's very into science.
Yeah.
So in this universe, he's basically wasting his life because literally everything he believes is not true.
Yeah.
So, but even if he was correct about everything, his daughter is 6 and she believes in fairies. And he's acting like this is a terrible thing. She's 6. Just humor her. It's adorable. At one point, he gives her like a naturalist journal so that she can do her own scientific observations, and she uses it to study fairies. And he's mad about this. I was so annoyed by him. He's a terrible father.
Yeah, he's that classic like, I don't you have to grow up and be more responsible and realistic, my dear child, who's only 6 years old. And it's like, well, technically, sir, she is actually more of a scientist than you
Yeah,
because her
really.
theories are real.
Exactly.
Like, I think there's a line where like Tinkerbell's like, "Oh, we bring all the seasons," and she's like, "What? I thought that came from the rotation of the sun." And Tinkerbell just like laughs and she's like, "Where do you get your silly ideas?" And you're just like, "Yeah, from her dad, who's the one who believes in magic, apparently, because he's the one who believes in fake things."
I will say though that I loved the scene where he captures a butterfly. The fairies are like horrified to see him with the butterfly in a jar, terrified
Yeah.
for his life. And
Hmm.
at that point, I was like, Well, I guess they're keeping it G-rated and not showing what an actual naturalist would do to a butterfly. But then they did. And you saw like butterfly corpses littering the walls.
Yeah. Yeah, like sometimes the Tinkerbell movies really dip into like, oh yeah, I'm thinking of like there's a big chance that Tinkerbell could literally die right now.
Yeah, she could have, especially with the rules about how the pixie dust works and with the rain and everything, because she's stuck there because eventually she's able to communicate with this girl and she's gonna let her free, but then it's raining.
Yeah.
But like she could have been killed in the storm apparently because she can't fly, so she might have drowned in a puddle or whatever.
Yeah.
And this is where I was just so confused by the rules about pixie dust and how they fly and why they fly and why is it that they can't fly in the rain, but the pixie dust makes it so that anything can fly except for fairies when they're wet. It's like
Yeah.
why? Why do you need to make all of these arbitrary rules just to add drama, I guess? It makes so little sense.
I guess just like it does not make sense that the fairies like with wings can't fly in the rain, but I think it is established rule that if it has pixie dust on it, pixie dust gets washed off when it gets wet.
I suppose.
Because like in the Pirate Fairy when we get to Pirate Fairy, but like they splash someone with water to wash off all the pixie dust and they fall into the water.
Yeah.
So
I guess
like
the thing that makes me question it though is because after they get into the house, they're being chased by this cat and they end up sprinkling pixie dust on a bunch of dishes so that they can make
yeah.
a bridge or something. But like
Hmm.
even though they're wet, they're not in danger of getting wet more. So why can't they
Yeah.
sprinkle pixie dust on themselves and float away that way, even though their wings don't work?
Yeah.
I was just so confused.
Yeah. No, for sure. It's ridiculous. And they bring it up too much that it makes you question it. You're like, I
Yeah.
shouldn't be questioning this, but the film shouldn't be leading me to these questions.
Yes, exactly. Then the film ends up culminating in Tinkerbell getting captured by the dad. And I was thinking, like, after he's captured her, he would realize that his daughter has been right all along. But instead of like apologizing for being so wrong, he just decides to take Tinkerbell away. It's like he has no intention of making things right with his kid. He just wants to be right about something, so he's going to take Tinkerbell to the museum. I was well, especially after they end up finally rescuing Tinkerbell and everything is made right between the dad and the daughter.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense with the way he has acted that everything is just immediately forgiven.
Yeah, definitely. That's like movie magic forgiven right there.
Yeah. At the end, it's like the end of the Grinch, like his heart grows three sizes or something, and suddenly he apologizes, and then the fairies make them both fly, and they all go home and have a tea party. It's like this is so ridiculous. This is my least favorite of all of these movies. I I really did not enjoy this one. I was confused and annoyed by a lot of this movie.
Yeah, this is not one. I watched this one more than others. It was not the least favorite of the family, but it was not one we watched a lot because we just didn't like enjoy the plot or the story as much, I guess.
Hmm.
Like this one we didn't revisit as much as say the second or the first one.
Which I can see why. Like even for a
Yeah.
little kid, I can't imagine a little kid really enjoying how not that she's like fully mistreated, but the dad just does not treat his daughter like a person.
Yeah.
He bosses her around, disregards things she says, tries to make her be something she's not. He's just an annoying character.
Yeah. He's like ripping her drawings off the wall. You're like, holy cow.
Yeah. Yeah. This would be the only if all of the movies were like this, I would really hate this whole series.
Yeah. It's one of the worst.
But then the next one is not really a movie. It was a 30-minute TV special, but it was originally supposed to be a movie.
Mhm.
It was originally going to be the last movie of what was a five feature deal, because I guess after the first one, they decided they were going to do five.
Okay.
But then something happened, and the fifth movie ended up getting shortened to a special, and then it was moved to be the fourth thing released. So, Secret of the Wings, which is the fourth movie, was originally going to come out before this. But once it was shortened up, this ended up being the first thing to come out.
Yeah.
And in this one, I don't remember if I said the title, Pixie Hollow Games, is basically like the Olympics for fairies.
Yeah.
And Tinkerbell is not the main character. She's like barely in this at all.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, the main character is now Rosetta, and this is the first time that Kristen Chenoweth is not in the movie. The rest of the series, she is now voiced by Megan Hilty. And I think she does a good enough impression of the character that if I didn't know who Kristen Chenoweth was, I don't think I would have even noticed.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think a kid is going to notice at all, especially because well, most of the characters really weren't like they had roles, but they were such small roles because there's like six of them. They had so
Mm-hmm.
few lines on their own that I don't think a kid is going to notice.
Yeah. Like, I think my main criticism, and I think one of the reasons why Tinkerbell probably didn't do as well as, say, like My Little Pony, is you had this entire cast of characters, but they never really dive into any of the other main cast members until the last one.
Yeah. Other than this special, when she
Yeah,
gets,
like the special, yeah, but like I remember seeing a trailer for the special coming out. It's also funny because, oh, I don't remember the movie, but I do remember watching a movie where the special, like the trailer for this special is in that movie, like just playing on the TV for some reason. I
what?
don't remember
In
the
the like
movie.
in a
In a
film?
movie, they're watching a trailer for this Tinkerbell Pixie Hollow Games thing. I cannot remember the movie, but it's
That's
just like
weird.
playing on the TV. It's one of the weirdest things.
It must have been like a Disney Channel thing.
Yeah.
Because, like, why would a regular movie have something like this? Like, that puts like Disney Synergy to a really weird level. Like, I know Disney Synergy is a thing and it's necessary for marketing purposes, but that almost seems like it's taking it too far. Like,
It's pretty crazy.
that is bizarre. That's so that's so random. But imagine being the person who's making the other movie and being told by some suit that you've got to put an advertisement for a Disney Fairy TV special in your film.
Yeah, I can't. I almost feel like it was like a low budget film though, and like they just had it playing in the background. Like it wasn't like Disney. I almost feel like it wasn't Disney asked them to. It was just it was in the film
Oh,
because they just wanted something to
I
be
could
playing on the
almost see
TV.
I could almost see that for like I don't know what kind of movie it was, but it almost seems like something that like a horror comedy parody would do. Like for
Yeah,
like when it like an asylum film or something.
yeah. Like I think I remember there was a period in my life where we watched a lot of not great Christian films, and I think it might have been one of those.
That also kind of makes sense.
I do not remember anything past that because this was a while ago and I don't think I watched the movie very much. But I never watched this special. I just remember seeing the trailer a lot. And it seemed to almost sell itself more like it was one of those CD video games. Because I think it did have on the CD, it had some like games you could play, like how you have on a DVD.
Well, I think that there might have been a tie-in, maybe web game. Well, a lot of these
Yeah,
we haven't really mentioned it, but almost all of these had a tie-in video game. Like for the
yeah.
probably the 3DS or the DS.
Hmm.
What like a handheld type thing.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't surprise me that there was some sort of tie-in. I'm not seeing anything on the page, but I know that there was a lot of like web games for different Disney
Hmm.
properties that you could find
Yeah.
on Disney.com.
I do yeah, like I just remember that I think the trailer I saw a lot leaned more heavily into that aspect, so I thought it was like I didn't ever realize that the Pixie Hollow games was a special. I thought it was like some like website with games on it or something. So I had never watched it growing up because I had thought it wasn't something you watched, it was something you played.
So you had not seen this until we were watching things for this podcast?
No, I hadn't seen this one.
Oh, okay. I just figured that this would have been one that you watched right along with the others.
Yeah, because I think the only way you could watch like I don't remember this one ever being on Netflix, and I think it's included like on the DVD of Secret of the Wings, but that one I exclusively watched on Netflix, so I had never seen this one.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, this one was weirdly hard to find. I had to find a not authorized source for a Stutch to be able to watch this because it's not on Disney Plus.
Yeah.
Well, also a main focus in this movie is another new character who I'm now realizing never came back. I don't
No.
think. Chloe, voiced by Brenda Song, probably more Disney synergy because she would have been in the Sweet Life series, both of the series. There was a movie, and I think she was in a Disney, another DCOM. She's a big Disney person, so
Yeah.
this would have been a lot more Disney synergy having her in this. But you would think that they would want to keep that synergy going by bringing the character back, but I don't think, unless she was a background character, I don't think Brenda Song ever came back for any of the rest of these.
I don't think so.
But yeah, this special is about Rosetta and Chloe going through the Pixie Hollow games. They represent the Garden Fairies. All of the fairies, each different faction of fairies send representatives to the games. They're representing the Garden Fairies. The Garden Fairies have never made it past the first round, so you're following them as they actually make it through the first round and make it all the way through the games. And their main competition is the Storm Fairies, who are a class of fairies that we have never seen before and we never see again.
Yeah.
Their names are Rumble and Glimmer. This was more Disney synergy because Jason Dolly, who would have been on Good Luck Charlie, and he was in something else too, wasn't he? Was he the kid? Like, I never saw much of the spin-off of That So Raven. I think he was in that when he was younger. I don't remember. I wasn't too familiar with him before Good Luck Charlie, but he would have been a big get for Disney synergy for this. And then Glimmer was voiced by Tiffany Thornton, who was in both Sunny with a Chance and So Random.
Hmm.
And also, I did not notice her in any of this, but Zendaya was in this. She played a character named Fern, but I do not remember who Fern is. I just saw her on the Wikipedia page. So this whole special was just Disney synergy from top to bottom.
Yeah.
Zendaya also had the main theme song, Dig Down Deeper.
Mm.
I think at the time, this probably would have been around the time that she was on Shake It Up. Because Zendaya had at least two Disney Channel shows.
Yeah.
I watched, Shake It Up was one of the last Disney Channel shows that I watched. Like, I watched Disney Channel far longer than I would have been the target audience. My cousin Shayna and I liked to just watch Disney Channel.
Hmm.
So we kept up with Shake It Up and Good Luck Charlie. And past that, I don't know that we kept up with anything. I guess we finally outgrew it when we were in our mid-20s. I don't know. But we knew who Zendaya was because of Shake It Up. We really liked Shake It Up at the time. But yeah, like you said, this was easily mistaken for a game. This is like the thinnest of plots. It's just a series of little vignettes, I guess, of them going through each sport,
Hmm.
doing better than anyone expects, and finally making it to the end. And then Rumble cheats to win the final game, and Glimmer abandons him at that point. And then I guess Rosetta and Chloe win by default
They
because
win
he cheated.
because, yeah. Well, they win because both team members have to pass and Glimmer didn't cross the
Oh,
finish line.
that's true. Yeah, yeah. But that's basically the end. It was shorter than I expected. I think it might have only been 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And I think I was expecting it to be like an hour. But yeah, it was just a really short thing.
Yeah.
But that's fine because if it had gone on more than 30 minutes, I would have been super bored.
Yeah, like it was probably the least complex of any of them.
Yeah.
And honestly, it just hit the mark of I'm never gonna watch that again. I'm not gonna think about it again. It was fine, but
Uh-huh.
It's not the worst thing I've seen, but it's very forgettable and there's not a lot to it. So like it's not a huge thing that I think you should track down. Like
Yeah.
oh, it's the hidden gem of the Tinkerbell series or anything like that.
No. Yeah. Well, after this is where I feel like things almost start turning around for the series. Like, I don't
Mm,
know how you feel. Apparently, your family didn't like the last one, but I feel like with the next one, Secret of the Wings, not that it's significantly better than the rest of them, the ones that have come before, but I
hmm.
feel like I was more invested in this at this point.
Okay.
Not that I loved it or anything, but like I enjoyed it more than I had previously. This one is about Tinkerbell discovering that she has a sister because going back to the being born of a baby's laugh, they introduced a new thing where if a baby's laugh splits in two, the two fairies born out of the same baby's laugh are sisters.
Hmm.
Kind of twins. They sort of look similar. They have identical wings, but sisters. And something happened when they were born so that her sister ended up going to the winter fairies and she ended up with the rest of the fairies. And this is where you also get the complication of the winter fairies are sequestered. They're like on an island away from everybody else, and they are never allowed to see each other
Yeah.
for some reason. They kind of explain that, but I feel like the reasoning ended up being so thin that it's kind of ridiculous that they decided to keep them apart.
Yeah.
But yeah, this one starts with the fairies all preparing for winter, and they explain that all of the seasons happen simultaneously on the island, and I was like, did we know this before? Because
Yes.
I guess now that you mentioned that they actually were in the winter area in the first movie,
Hmm.
okay. But I don't know that they made it very clear. So this was the first time that I really noticed that there is a season happening in each area of this island or whatever Pixie Hollow is. Like at this point, I had completely forgotten that this was tied into Peter Pan. I didn't remember until the next one that this was Neverland. I was like, oh, wait a minute. I forgot. This is Neverland.
Yeah.
Because they always like refer to it as the mainland. So in my head, Pixie Hollow is like an island across a river from I don't
From
know.
London.
Yeah, something like that. I don't know. Anyway, all of the seasons are happening simultaneously. So I was confused as to why they have to prepare for winter because they're moving all of the animals that live in Pixie Hollow over to the winter area. And like they were talking about preparing for winter, and I thought they were talking about preparing for winter on the mainland. But then they're moving all of the animals from one season to the next. But like, why? I was very confused.
Yeah, like I think the idea is that while they have the seasons on like everywhere on the island, like the animals move throughout it and they like it is a bit confusing. Like, do they take the because like the entire way that the Pixie Hollow works is like they paint the ladybugs and the butterflies and all that, which like kind of makes sense in a way, but also you're like, okay, but if we paint the butterflies while winter's going on and then in spring we get butterflies, like what happens with the caterpillar to chrysalis to butterfly section?
Well,
And then
that's
like,
why I was confused because up until now, I've just been under the assumption that everything that they're doing is for the mainland.
yeah. And so like it's like, well, if we go under that logic, then are we changing the rabbits' coats from summer coats to winter coats by them going into winter? But also then did we take all rabbits across the world back to Pixie Hollow and then like
Yeah.
change like it like having it disconnected that they do everything that changes over seasons into Pixie Hollow. Like, are those different rabbits? I don't know. Maybe your little pet rabbit is a different rabbit during winter and they just swap them out. I'm unsure exactly like how that plays out
Hmm.
entirely. Like again, it's one of those things where you have your lore, but as you have more lore, it makes less
Yes.
sense.
Yes, exactly. The more complications they introduce, the
The
more
more
the whole
problems.
the whole story falls apart.
It's kind of like I feel like the Tinkerbell show series is like if you have a pipe that runs water and then you have a small leak and they put something over it, like they slap some flex tape over it, but then that causes pressure in another area which starts to burst, and then they just slap more flex tape, and they're not actually fixing the problem. They're just slapping flex tape, like this is how this works. Don't worry about it. And you're like, but no, the hole. There's all these other holes popping out of your pipe, and you haven't fixed any of those. You're just slapping fixed tape everywhere
You know,
and causing more pressure.
now that you're making that analogy, I bet that's what killed the series. Because
Mm-hmm.
on the Wikipedia page for the last movie, they talk about the sequels. Like there was supposed to be at least a seven and an eight.
Mm-hmm.
And they ended up getting canceled because they were having too many story problems. I wonder if those story problems were caused by all of the retconning and lore meddling that they kept doing in all the other
Yeah.
movies. It ended up breaking the plans that they had to the point where they realized we can't make this tie in with Peter Pan anymore. Let's just end this.
Yeah.
Anyways, back to these animals. This also made me question, what do the animals eat? Because I feel like there was something in the beginning, and you get more in the last movie with hawks. Like obviously there are predators, but here you have rabbits coexisting with weasels.
Mm-hmm.
Weasels eat rabbits.
Yeah.
So what are they feeding these weasels? How do weasels survive in Pixie Hollow?
Like yeah, like again, like just as more stuff happens, you start asking more questions and
Hmm.
questions that you really shouldn't be asking, but they create situations where you're asking these strange questions.
Yes. And speaking of questions, thankfully one that actually gets answered because Tinkerbell wants to visit Winter, but she's not allowed. And I was like, who is making these rules? Well, we actually get an answer to that question later on. But
Yeah.
she ends up sneaking across the border and her wings start glowing. And she goes home and no one will believe her. And they insist that she see the healing fairy because they think that something's wrong with her. She's because she went to the cold, it has damaged her in some way. And
Hmm.
I found it interesting. I didn't realize at first, but Jodie Benson plays the healing fairy,
Yeah.
which is not it's not a huge role, but I thought it was interesting that they got her for that. And then obviously nothing is really wrong with her. And I figured that this was leading to a revelation that there was nothing wrong with crossing over into winter, which I guess is not true because I guess there is a problem. So she starts researching what was going on with her wings, but the page of the book that has the answers is half eaten by a bookworm. I was like, why do they keep a bookworm in the library if it's going to destroy the books? It's like the bookworm is apparently allowed to be there, but it's eating everything and it's destroying crucial fairy knowledge.
Yeah. Humor, it's funny.
I
Also,
guess
who
so.
who keep books? Because we find out there's the bookkeeper. But like what's his talent? Is he the only bookkeeper?
I don't know. I
Like, is
guess
his yeah, like he gets his own special categorization, I guess. Like we've destroyed the one basic system that we have built, and it's the talent system because now we have a bookkeeper who doesn't technically fall under any of the talents.
maybe he's one of the ones that got expelled from whatever they were supposed to do,
Uh
and he picked up a new talent.
he's like, all right, I can't be a frost fair anymore because of my frost crimes, so I'm gonna go be a bookkeeper now.
Uh-huh. But yeah, she can't find the information that she wants in the half-eaten book. So she finds out that there is this keeper of fairy knowledge, but he's a winter fairy, so she can't talk to him. So
Uh-huh.
she decides to sneak across the border in a basket carried by an owl. And she finds this guy, and he has probably the worst example of CGI in the whole movie because he has this lynx that is so not the same style as everything else. It's not cute. It just feels like it's not as bad as like early CGI, like pre-Toy Story levels, but it's
Hmm.
not as good as the rest of this. It just has this uncanny valley look to it. I
Yeah.
really didn't like this lynx.
Yeah.
But from this guy, she finds out that she has a sister because she hears him talking to somebody who has the same glowing wing issue that she does. And she discovers Periwinkle, who was born from the same laugh that she was born from. So they become friends, and he tells her that she has to go back, but she says she did, but he didn't say when. So they're going around Winterland, and you meet different winter fairies. You have Debbie Ryan in here, more Disney synergy, playing a fairy named Spike. And I was surprised that she didn't get a song because up until now, you've got all these big Disney Channel names, and
Hmm.
like Zendaya gets the song in her special, but the song in this one was The Great Divide by the McLean sisters. And I don't know how the timeline lines up, but one of them, China Anne McLean, ended up becoming a Disney kid. She had a show called Ant Farm,
Hmm.
which I know I watched some of that, but I don't remember if I ever finished that show because that was about the time where I was like Shayna and I weren't watching Disney Channel anymore together anymore. So I think I just kind of fell out of keeping up with
Yeah.
everything.
Hmm.
And I know she went on to do more than just that because she was in the Descendants series and she's had a few other roles, but I don't think she ever was a fairy in this. She just had that song. But anyways, Debbie Ryan was one of the fairies, and also Matt Lanter played Sled. And I was listening to his voice. I was like, why do I know this voice? Why do I know this voice? So I looked him up. I was like, oh, he's Anakin in the Clone Wars series.
Yeah, right.
And then you also have Lord Mallory, who you get the idea that he is the originator of this rule. And he was another one where I was like, why do I know this guy? Why do I know this voice? It's Timothy Dalton, another big name that they've got for some reason. Like they weirdly got big names for a bunch of roles in these movies. Even
Yeah.
ones that were like small roles. Not that he's a
Hmm.
small role. And he comes back in another movie, but I don't remember if he had any lines in the other movie. Maybe he didn't.
I don't think he does. I think he just like he either has one line or he like just is there because time has passed. Winter fairies are hanging out with the other fairies now.
Yeah. But eventually they decide to take Periwinkle back to, I guess, the land of summer. I don't know. Yeah, the part of Pixie Hollow that she lives in. And she wants to tell the queen of what's going on. She says that she'll make the Lord of Winter change his rules. So she invents this snow machine that will sprinkle snow on Periwinkle while she's in the land so that she won't get too hot. And she introduces her to everybody. But before they get to the queen, it runs out of ice and Periwinkle's wings start wilting. So they have to rush her back before she dies or something. But then you discover that the queen was the reason that this rule exists. They have this story about two fairies who fell in love, and as soon as she started telling the story, I was like, "Well, it's obviously the Queen and Lord Mallory."
Yeah.
like they make it like to be like this big revelation at the end, but like the second she started talking, I was like, "She's talking about herself."
Yeah.
But they had this romance. One fairy was from the warm seasons and the other was from the winter, and ended up with one of them crossing the border, and something happened, and one of them broke a wing, and there's no cure for a broken wing. So she decided that they have to keep the land separate for the safety of all the fairies. Okay. I feel like you
Because
could have figured out something better than this, but okay.
yeah, and like also like, no one's ever thought to cross the barrier since then.
Yeah.
No one's ever broken a wing on a tree branch.
But this is why, like I mentioned before, this is where I started thinking like, even though like fairy culture, whatever, has been apparently around for thousands of years, the way they live now, it has to only date back like 100 years or however old Queen Clarion is.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the stuff seems to be because of stuff that she has made up.
Yeah.
Because I don't think she's thousands of years old. Because
I
she
don't
talks
think
about,
so.
I don't remember which one she's talking about things happening like 100 years ago. I don't know. Like the timeline is confusing. And maybe it's something that I'm just overthinking because I'm watching these all together in a short amount of time.
Hmm.
And the point of these movies is to entertain kids once every couple of years when they release a new one. And kids aren't going to think about this stuff. But anyways, eventually Lord Mallory knocks her snow machine into the river, which somehow causes like a day after tomorrow ice age. For some random reason. It makes no sense because this thing she invented was basically a pile of acorns and a cheese grater. Like, how on
Yeah.
earth does this cause an apocalypse? I just, as soon as that started happening, I just started laughing. I was like, this is so ridiculous. And like, not that I'm saying that this makes this movie terrible or anything. I enjoyed this one more than I had previously, but I had so many questions. Even though I enjoyed it for what it was, it caused so many questions.
Yeah, I think that's why again, I watched this one more than like The Great Fairy Escape. But this one was also one we just didn't watch that much because I think it had too much of that whole plot thing that even the kids of the family didn't. They were all like, I
It
don't
was
get it.
so
Like,
convoluted,
why?
even the
Yeah,
kids noticed.
it was a bit like either the kids noticed or they're like, I don't get it. Like, why? Like, they're just like, but why? Like, it's
Mm,
so convoluted yet simple that even kids weren't quite on board with everything that happened. So, like, none of us fully enjoyed too much of this one.
hmm.
So, it wasn't one we watched as much as, say, the first or the second, which were a lot more watched.
I guess that makes sense. I don't really have an explanation as to why I started liking them more. Maybe it was something akin to
They
Stockholm
do.
Syndrome, but I just feel like the last three were way better than the first three.
Yeah, I think another thing is most of the people who at that time it was a lot of boys who were watching it. So I think they just enjoyed like the adventure more as opposed to the story about like finding a lost sister didn't have a magic to them as much. So like
Hmm.
they were like, I'd rather watch Tinkerbell go on a journey and like
Okay.
fight off rats than watch Tinkerbell find her secret sister and all that. So
I guess that makes sense. But yeah, eventually they are able to avert the apocalypse because Tinkerbell discovers that the Winter Fairy's frost powers are able to shield everything from the oncoming snowpocalypse.
mhm.
And they save everything. But at some point, Tinkerbell breaks the wing. I don't remember it happening, but you get like a revelation at the end, like, oh, her wing is broken. She will never fly again. But then it's magically fixed when she touches wings with her sister. And at that point, I thought it was going to be a revelation of like, oh, each fairy can heal the other if they use the magic of their wings. And now the king of the frost fairies can heal his wing. And but no, his wing is broken forever, I guess.
Yeah.
But then they decide nobody will ever be separated again, and the king and queen kiss, and I guess it's happily ever after.
Yep.
And then after this, there's another special, and I started watching it. I was under the impression that this was another half-hour special or longer. And I noticed at the bottom, like the line showing how far you're getting in was going really fast.
Yeah, it
It
was
was
like
like
5 minutes.
it was literally just 5 or 6 minutes. This was Pixie Hollow Bake Off. I'm not sure what this was made for. It was not a half-hour special like the Olympics one. It was just a little short about Tink challenging Gelada, the baking fairy, another class of fairies that we had never seen before and we will never see again, to see who can make the best cake for the Queen's party. And I feel like even I feel like the only reason that they did this was because somebody thought of the idea of making Giada de Laurentiis into a fairy
Yeah.
because she was the focus of this whole special. Except they also changed it for the UK version. Somebody named Lisa Faulkner, who I guess has done some cooking shows over there, but I feel like even people who don't watch cooking shows know the name Giada de Laurentiis.
Mm.
So why not keep her for the UK version also? It seemed like a weird recast to me, but whatever.
Yeah.
But the whole thing revolves around the baking fairies always make the exact same cake, and they've done this way for the last 399 years, which also I thought there was another line in a different thing about she became queen like 100 years ago, but maybe I misinterpreted something. I don't know. Again, I'm so confused by the timeline of all of these. But whatever. Tinkerbell has an idea for a different kind of cake, and they decide to do a baking challenge, and Tinkerbell almost wins because her cake looks so creative and awesome, and the other cake is so boring and white, and it's the same cake, but then her cake
Hmm.
tastes terrible. So,
Yeah.
so Giada or Gelada's Giada Gelada's cake actually wins because hers is edible, and that's the end. That was it. Was this one that you had seen before now, or did you only watch it for the first time because of the podcast?
I only watched this. I never heard of this at all. I don't know how it was created. I don't know where it came from.
Yeah, I don't know. I have no explanations.
It
It
kind
probably
of
was a
has
DVD
like,
thing.
yeah, it probably was like a short on one of the DVDs, or it gives me like when they would do those little YouTube videos, like it has that energy to it. Like that they would have made a collection of YouTube videos, but like it's the only one, so that's not what it is. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. On Wikipedia, it just says that it debuted on the Disney Channel in the UK, and then it was released as a bonus feature on the
Hmm.
Pirate Fairy. There's no behind the scenes info or anything. So I guess we will never know. The mystery of this special is lost to time. But after this, you start getting into, well, I guess there's only two left, but I feel like the last two, especially, even more than the one, The Secret of the Wings, I feel like they're actually proper movies. Like they don't feel like they're leaning on Disney synergy. They feel like they're actually trying to make a good movie that could potentially be released in the theater. Like I still feel like these wouldn't be fully theatrical quality, but the last two, more than anything that's come before, I feel like they get the closest to feeling like a theatrical movie.
Yeah.
And I feel like part of that is because they're kind of getting away from feeling like they have to tie into like Disney Channel stuff. Like the last two, the theme songs are not done by like Disney Channel kids. This one is for the Pirate Fairy, it's Who Am I by Natasha Bedingfield,
Hmm.
who is like an actual proper mainstream music star, not from Disney Channel. So I don't know if that has to do with it, but I don't know. These feel like they're not amazing or anything, but they just feel like they're on a higher tier than the others have been.
Hmm.
And this one opens with music that is very obviously based on the Peter Pan soundtrack. And you're flying towards the second star to the right. And this is where I was suddenly reminded, oh yeah, this is based on Peter Pan. I had I literally had completely forgotten. I I was not in Peter Pan mode. Like even though I'm doing this whole series on Peter Pan, watching all of these had just Peter Pan had disappeared completely from my mind. And then I was like, have they been in Neverland this whole time? I guess so. And this is also where you start getting away from Tinkerbell, which maybe helps this feel, not that Tinkerbell is a bad character or anything, but maybe it helps to follow new characters instead of just following Tinkerbell all the time. In this one, you're following a fairy named Zarina, who is voiced by Christina Hendricks. And when I first saw that it was Christina Hendricks, I was like, did they do this because they're both in Good Girls? Because Christina Hendricks is like the main character on Good Girls. Mae Whitman is the third. Like there's three main cast members, but like you have Christina Hendricks and then Retta and then Mae Whitman, and I always think
Hmm.
of them in that order. But this was before Good Girls, I guess, so it's just a coincidence. Because I was thinking like this is a weird thing to have a tie-in to a show for adults, but nope, it was just a coincidence.
It's just, yeah.
Random weirdness.
Yeah.
And another thing probably that added to why I liked this movie more is that Zarina asks so many questions that I've had. She's like actually trying to figure out how the lore of her own land works.
Yeah.
Like she is asking the questions that all the other fairies should have been asking hundreds of years ago.
Hmm.
She's like, why does this happen this way? Why do we do things this way? Why are we only
Yeah.
allowed to do this? Why can we not do that? And I was like, this character is actually thinking, and I like her.
Yeah. Like they never give you an actual answer, but
No, I did notice that. I was like, she's asking the questions, and I like that, but you don't get an answer. And it makes sense that they wouldn't answer the questions. And I guess I'm fine with it because of what this series is. But I like that they're at least asking.
yeah.
But yeah, she is a dust keeper fairy. So her job revolves around pixie dust, and most of her questions have to do with how pixie dust works. But Fairy Gary, who is the guy in charge of the Dustkeeper fairies, doesn't like her questions and basically tells her to do her job and stop asking questions.
You don't understand. We live in a communist society, okay?
No thinking. But it turns out she's been doing pixie dust experiments and coming up with different magical ways to use pixie dust that nobody had ever thought of before. And she goes and gets Tinkerbell to show her what she's been doing because she had a breakthrough. And she likens her experiments to the way Tinkerbell was tinkering with different things and changed how the Tinker Fairies worked. And she's hoping that this will lead to something similar for the Dustkeeper Fairies until she accidentally causes this massive plant explosion, which grows a huge vine and destroys the pixie dust factory. And like they don't say that she's banished, but for all intents and purposes, she gets banished. Maybe it's a self-banishing, but she is fired
Yeah.
specifically and leaves.
Hmm.
So then you pick up a year later, and the fairies are having a Four Seasons festival. All the fairies are gathered in one place, and Zarina comes back in, and she's sneaking around planting poppies everywhere, putting people to sleep. And I was like, did they do this as a Wizard of Oz reference? The only place I have for context of poppies being used to put people to sleep is the Wizard of Oz. I'm not
Mm.
sure that poppies actually cause drowsiness. Maybe I should look that up. But to me, like poppies being a thing to cause sleep is a Wizard of Oz thing.
So I guess like Poppy's name derives from sleep bringing, the Latin term for sleep bringing. So I guess that's where sleepy poppies come from.
Oh, well, I knew that they were used in making opium, and I guess opium is a sedative. So,
Hmm.
okay, I guess that makes sense.
The more you know.
So I guess they're probably a reference to that more than the Wizard of Oz, and the Wizard of Oz was probably their use there was also a reference to that.
Hmm.
So they were just referencing the same thing rather than this referencing the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. But yeah, she's using poppies to put all the other fairies to sleep, and the only people that escape are Tinkerbell and her friends because they notice in time and are able to hide. And which one? Clank?
Yeah. Clank is the one who does not fall asleep.
Yes, because he was in the outhouse.
Yeah.
And then I was like, fairies use the bathroom? This had not been something that ever crossed my mind before. The fairies need to use the bathroom, apparently.
They answer the questions we didn't need to know and give us more questions with answers we never get.
Apparently. Okay, whatever. But yeah, so he escaped being put to sleep along with the main cast of fairies. So they go after Serena and they put him in charge of watching over all the asleep fairies. Then they give him, I think it's the same machine from the last thing, like
Yeah.
the snow machine, even though it was thrown into the river. She must have made a new one. So he has to like hurriedly pedal this thing the entire time they're gone, apparently, to cause snow to fall over the winter fairies so they don't die while they're all asleep.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, whatever. I guess this is another thing that they probably could have just the amount of retconning that they do, they could have just been fine. Just let them sleep and they would have been fine. I don't know. Well, they follow her and they discover that Serena is now the captain of a pirate ship. Well, they follow her and discover that she has stolen their blue pixie dust because we've already established that the blue pixie dust is need to use to make the regular pixie dust so that they can fly. And without the
Hmm.
blue pixie dust, they are going to eventually run out and then they won't be able to fly anymore. So they've got to get
Yeah.
this blue pixie dust back.
Hmm.
So they follow her, and now she's the captain of a pirate ship, and they are going to use this blue pixie dust to make a new pixie dust factory and create enough pixie dust to make the pirate ship fly so that they can go back to the real world and rob all of the famous museums. And they had a whole list of things they were going to do, like steal mummies from Egypt. But
Hmm.
basically, if something was famous, they were going to steal it in their flying pirate ship.
Yeah.
which is ridiculous, but whatever, it works for this. So they try and get this stuff, the blue fairy dust back from them, and she has, in the meantime, created all of these different colors of the rainbow pixie dust, and she throws it at them, and it somehow switches all their powers around. And now they have also new outfits to go with the new powers. So they've got to learn how to use all their new powers. Tinkerbell is now a water fairy, and the other main one is Rosetta, who is an animal fairy now, and she hatches a crocodile, which as soon as that thing came out of the egg, I was like, okay, this is supposed to be the origin story of the crocodile that eats Captain Hook's hand. But that thing was actually really cute, and I kind of want a little toy of that crocodile. It was a really cute version of that crocodile.
It was.
I mean, I already love like animated lizards, like Rapunzel's Pascal and the little
Hmm.
lizard from Frozen 2.
Hmm.
Like this could just fit right alongside them. It was that level of cute, adorable lizard.
Yeah.
So they all make their way back to the pirate ship. You also see a pirate here, voiced by Tom Hiddleston, weirdly enough. I think this was like right in the middle of him coming out as one of the Avengers. Well, not Avenger at that point, he's Loki, but
Yeah.
as a character in the Avengers movies. So I don't know if that was supposed to be the Disney synergy, but it was kind of strange to have such a big name in a movie like this, but it worked, I guess.
Hmm.
And they discover that they've created this secret hideout in Skull Rock, I think, from the
Yeah.
original Peter Pan movie, where they've recreated the pixie dust factory. They're making all this pixie dust, and they all get captured. And the pirates turn on Zarina once she has everything up and running. So she gets locked in a lantern like Tinkerbell in the original Peter Pan movie,
Hmm.
and the rest get kept in a wooden crate by Oppenheimer, the ship's cook. Like, why did they name him Oppenheimer? Like,
Yeah, I know.
it's such a random, weird, specific name because, like, Oppenheimer is the guy who created the nuclear bomb, but he's like, this guy has nothing to do with anything like that. So I don't think it was a reference to that.
No, I think it's just a name they came up with.
It was weird, but he's kind of hilarious. I love him talking to the portrait of his hideous mother. They eventually get set free by the baby crocodile. Then there's like long sequences of like fighting the pirates because they take off in the pirate ship and they're threatening to kill Zarina, and like this goes on for a while. But
Hmm.
it never felt boring. It just new ways to fight the pirates kept happening.
Yeah.
This is another reason why I felt like this felt like a show because most of these movies could have been wrapped up in a half an hour, but they kept doing different things to stretch it out. Even
Yeah.
though it didn't really feel stretched out, but like there was so many like fight sequences of the fairies like
Hmm.
fighting and like they make Captain Hook fly he's not Captain Hook yet, but they make him fly and then there's like an aerial battle and yeah,
Yeah.
it went on for quite a while. But ultimately, they beat the pirates and they go back home. And Zarina is welcomed with open arms for some reason. And they're now like fine with all of her stuff. And they make up a whole new category of fairy for her. She's now a fairy dust alchemist. Okay. Like, I feel like that this was wrapped up a bit too neatly. Like, the way she was basically banished to coming back, having fully explored everything that she was banished for
Hmm.
beyond the point where she was banished for it. And now it's fine. Okay.
Yeah, I think the idea was that Fairy Gary got mad and said you shouldn't come back to work. And then she left. Like I think the idea was that they never meant for her to completely leave, and everyone felt really guilty about it. Like that at that point she had left and there was no way for them to just talk about it. It's one of those situations where if you had talked about it, the movie wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
And so that's why it wrapped up super easily because I think it was like more like she was like, "Oh, I did a terrible thing," and they're like, "No, we were just mad at you because you wrecked everything. It's not like we wanted you to leave forever."
Okay, that makes sense. You've solved it.
I've solved the case. I've cracked the case. I will say I've seen this one. I think I've seen this one the most. This one was the most popular in my family.
Well, you did mention about more boys and
Yeah.
liking the action. This one would have been the most action
Yep.
packed of all of these.
Everyone liked the action. A lot of people liked the Peter Pan elements being in the movie.
Maybe that's why I like this one the most.
Yeah.
I feel like there's so many areas where I am not a stereotypical boy, but I did really, even though the fight sequences went on for a long time, it all was enjoyable. And I
Yeah.
felt like it was really creative. So maybe that's why this one was one of my favorites. I think this
Like,
actually
yeah.
probably was my favorite because I did
Yeah.
enjoy the next one too, but probably not to the degree I enjoyed this one.
hmm Yeah. I think just like this one, it has like it's got the Peter Pan elements, it's got kind of the adventure to it. It feels like situations happen without it just kind of happening. Like, for example, in The Secret of the Wings, it's like, well, we have to knock off the things so that we can create a massive blizzard. Just and you're like, okay, I guess we'll just have to suspend our belief that that's how that would have happened. It's like it makes sense how things happen. It had the
Yeah.
songs in it, so
Hmm.
like it kind of had a little bit of a musical element, so like that helped like kids enjoy it. The characters were funny, the supporting cast did more.
That's true. Yeah. That is one thing that I did really enjoy. The supporting cast had a much bigger role for this movie.
Yeah,
They actually
like
had things to do.
yeah, they had things to do and they weren't just there because they're part of Tinkerbell's gang kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, and also this one ends with a mid-credit scene with Smee
Yeah.
rescuing Captain Hook at sea. And I think Jeff Bennett did his voice,
Yes.
and I think he also did his voice for both Return to Neverland and Jake and the Neverland Pirates.
That doesn't surprise me.
Because I think Corey Burton, it's not been that long. It's why I mean it's been like 6 months since I've seen the others. But
hmm
I feel like Corey Burton was, let me look this up. I think Corey Burton and Jeff Bennett were the two actors that were doing like the follow-up Peter Pan stuff. Yeah, Jeff Bennett was Mr. Smee in Return to Neverland.
hmm
And Corey Burton was Captain Hook. Yep. They probably could have gotten Corey Burton back as Captain Hook for this.
Yeah, they probably could have. It's kind of more of that the studio wanted a big name to tack on to the poster
Yeah,
kind of thing.
yeah. And I mean, for a role like this, Tom Hiddleston works.
Yeah.
Well, the last movie is Tinkerbell and the Legend of the Never Beast. And for the previous couple of movies, you had Tinkerbell was taken out of the title.
hmm
So Secret of the Wings and The Pirate Fairy did not have Tinkerbell in the title.
Yeah.
But this one, they put Tinkerbell back in the title, and she doesn't show up till almost halfway through the movie.
Yeah, it's like the least amount she's ever been in any of the movies.
It was so weird because I like when they have Tinkerbell in the title, I expected, I mean, she's been the main character for the entire series.
hmm
So then when you open the movie and you're following Fawn, it's just weird. Like I have no problem with that because like Fawn was a good pick for a character to follow in this movie. And I kind of like if the movies had kept going, I think that should have been a direction that they could have taken this,
Yeah.
following a different fairy for each movie rather than only focusing on Tinkerbell.
Yeah.
But it was just weird that they put Tinkerbell in the title and then you're
hmm
just following Fawn.
It should have just been called the Legend of the Never Beast,
Yes.
just like Secret Fairy and Secret of the Wings and stuff like that.
Yeah, it should have. But in this one, Fawn has been recast, and I'm not really sure why, except for the fact that it's Jennifer Goodwin. And I'm guessing they just wanted a bigger name. I don't know. I guess the actress who was playing Fawn after America Ferrera, she never really did anything big, so maybe she didn't want to.
hmm
Like there's this is me speculating. No one online is saying this. This is just me wondering why Jennifer Goodwin got this role.
Yeah.
But it could have been for Disney Synergy. I'm not sure how the timeline lines up, but she was Snow White in Once Upon a Time.
Yeah.
And I think this probably would have been before Zootopia, but she was Judy Hopps. So I don't know. But she did a good job. She was a good choice if they're going to
Yeah.
recast her. She was a good one. So this one, you open with this green comet flying over Pixie Hollow, which is not really explained. And then you're following Fawn as she's getting in trouble for saving a baby hawk because hawks eat fairies. And she reforms after she's gotten in trouble for this until she finds this giant monster, the Never Beast.
hmm
And I don't know what they were going for with the look of this thing, but to me, At first glance, I thought it was a more cartoony version of the Bandersnatch from Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland. But also the way it was moving and the expressions on his face, I kind of thought it looked like Sweetums from the Muppets. But then Fawn thinks it looks like a cross between. She uses the Latin names, so I'm not 100% sure, but I think she uses the Latin names for an opossum and a bison, which makes sense because the tail looks very
Hmm.
opossum-like,
Yeah.
and it's a massive hulking creature, kind of like a bison.
Yeah.
And it eventually gets horns too, so I guess all descriptions are valid. But then you also get introduced to a new class of fairies in this movie who you've never seen before. And I imagine that if the series went on, you would never see again. The Scout Fairies, led by Nyx, who was voiced by Rosario Dawson,
Yeah.
which I was surprised by. I don't know why. I just never expected to see Rosario Dawson in a movie like this. But then also, there's another character named Fury, who is voiced by Denai Guerrera. Another name I would never expect in a movie like this. She plays Okoye in the Black Panther
Yeah.
and Avengers movies.
Yeah.
It was like, this is so random that they got these big name stars for this movie. And
Yeah.
her character really has very few lines. And she's another
Hmm.
one that they recast for the UK version. They put Mel B in her place for the UK version. And Mel
Huh.
B is from the Spice Girls.
Yeah.
So I guess that's probably why they did it, because the Spice Girls are bigger in the UK than they were in America. But still, it's
That's
like
still strange.
a random recast.
Yeah.
But anyways, Fawn ends up naming this creature Gruff, and it starts building a bunch of towers around Pixie Hollow because it has this glue-like spit. So it starts stacking up rocks with the spit, which
Hmm.
is weird, but it works for what you eventually find out. And she eventually shows her friends, and this is where Tinkerbell shows up. It's like, we're like a third to halfway through this movie, and Tinkerbell is only now showing up. She wants to show the Queen also, but when she gets to the Queen, she finds Nyx there explaining that she's been researching this creature because Nyx saw the creature briefly, and she found this legend of the Neverbeast that says that a green comet will pass overhead. I think it's like every 1,000 years, and it wakes up the Neverbeast, who builds towers all around Pixie Hollow and transforms into a massive bat-winged creature and destroys Pixie Hollow. And this is again where how does the timeline work? How old is Pixie Society? Because they know this happens every 1,000 years.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
it's
at
another
the least has to be 2,000 years.
yes. It's another thing where I was like, you're overthinking this, just go with it. So they decide they're going to hide Gruff, but he eventually does transform into this thing that Nick said he would, and he ends up injuring Tinkerbell. They think he injured Tinkerbell. It turns out later that he was saving her. But because Tinkerbell got injured, even Fawn thinks he's now dangerous. So she helps the Scout Fairies capture him. And while all this is happening, there's like this green storm gathering in the sky, and it seems to be getting worse. But even now that he's captured, it's still getting worse.
Hmm.
So all the fairies decide to free him, and they help him they help him get to all his towers, and he starts collecting lightning. It's like, this lightning does not act like real lightning, but they're in a fairyland, so just go with it.
Yeah.
The lightning is like, it strikes down onto the tower, but then it sticks to him, and it follows him as he's flying.
Yeah.
But then he gets to the last tower, and Nyx destroys it, and then the lightning starts setting everything on fire. But he somehow manages to fly through the sky and collects all the lightning, and it explodes and saves Pixie Hollow, and
Hmm.
his horns and wings end up getting burnt off. And like, it's not horrifically graphic, but the way it happened, it was almost kind of jarring to me because it was
Yeah.
the least child-friendly thing that I'd seen so far. Just his
Yeah.
like shriveled, bony wings as they collapse into dust.
Yeah.
And it seems like Fawn is killed, but then he still has some like residual green lightning energy, and
Hmm.
he zaps her like a defibrillator and revives her. And then they all have to get together and rebuild Pixie Hollow, and Gruff is helping them, but he's like getting more and more tired. And then the fairies realize that he has to hibernate because apparently he will sleep for 1,000 years. And then it's like they hold a funeral for him, and like, I don't know why, but this is like the most emotional thing in this entire series. It was the most melancholy way to end this movie. And since they canceled the series after that, it's the most
Yeah.
melancholy end.
Yeah.
Such a downer note to end this entire series on.
Yeah, like you didn't even get like a happy ending where they're like, well, at least we still have our friendship for the times we spent together. No, it's like, goodbye, I'll never see you again. Credits
Yeah,
roll, and you're like, wait, what?
yeah, exactly. That's exactly how I felt. Like, yes, it's technically a happy ending. He saved Pixie Hollow. All the fairies are fine. But like just the way that they executed this whole scene,
Yeah,
it
it
felt
wasn't
like a
happy.
funeral.
Yeah, everyone was like sad. Fawn was in tears, and you're just like, what happened?
Yeah. I was like,
Like, no wonder your none of the kids wanted to return for another one. You emotionally scarred them.
maybe that's why your family didn't like this one. That actually
It
makes perfect
very
sense.
it very well could have been. Honestly, like I do not agree that it's the worst out of all of them. I think, in my opinion, my least favorite is the Great Fairy Rescue.
Yeah.
I think it could come from I have seen that one multiple times and I don't really ever really want to watch it again just with how much I've watched it. But like I don't really want to watch The Never Beast ever again either because like it was such a downer ending. It's like, well, okay.
Yeah. I mean, if I had to watch any of these again, this would probably be near the top of my list,
hmm
but more so for the first half of the movie than the second.
Yeah, like the last bit's just like I think my two least favorite is probably The Great Fairy Rescue and The Secret of the Wings.
Hmm.
Just because the Secret of the Wing ones kind of infuriates me with how like little anything happens and it's so convoluted.
That is true. I did like it more than the previous three, but it is very convoluted. And I don't want to say it breaks the lore because, like, what
Oh,
lore?
it
They
very
break the
well
lore
does
in
break the
every
lore.
movie, but that one more seemed to break more lore than anything else.
Yeah.
But I still liked it well enough, I guess.
No, and I understand. But like I think like I did watch the best ones in my opinion the most because I mean I've seen Pirate Fairy so many times. I can like legitimately like beat by beat tell you exactly like what's gonna happen while we watch it. I'm like, okay, and then she's going to take 3 steps and then hop and then like I can tell you exactly because I think for like a month or so I my family watched like every single day. And so like I didn't watch it every single time, but like it was constantly played.
Yeah.
So like I was like, okay, I know exactly because like one of the little kids would want to watch it because it was one of the movies that they had easy access to, and they were very into repeating the same media.
What that is such a kid. My family did the same thing. That is such a kid's thing to do. Like you find something you like and then just watch it to death. We did that
Yeah,
with Mary Poppins. We borrowed that from somebody and watched it all the time until we had to give it back. And then I don't know
yeah,
that I ever watched it again while I was a kid. I think I didn't see it again until I was an adult because we watched it to death.
yeah. That's the thing. Like, I think it's just the familiarity, and you know that you're gonna like it, as opposed to going to see a movie and you're like unsure if you're gonna like it.
Hmm.
Like as a kid, you're just like, well, I know I'm gonna have a blast watching this, so I'm gonna watch it like just nonstop because I never want it to end. So like Pirate Fairy, I've seen the most. I think it is probably the best out of all of them.
Yeah, I think thinking back, not that I want to rank them all, but I think that would
Yeah.
probably be my favorite as well.
Yeah. And then like I liked the Never Beast one, but again, the ending and I appreciate them trying to like branch out and create more like add more character to these cast of characters that we have been
Hmm.
hanging out with for 6 years. And we only just got like a little bit of character added to at least one of them. Like they
Hmm.
had like very basic character traits that they never really moved past. And
Yeah.
it was nice to see like a more in-depth look into these characters that again we've known for 6 years. But it is a bit sad that like that's how we ended the entire franchise. It's like, yeah, that big lovable friend, he is basically dead because they're never gonna see him again because apparently fairies don't live over 1,000 years except if you're maybe the queen. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't, again, I don't know
Again,
the
making us
timeline. I don't know how old she is.
again, you're making me think of Death of Fairies. Like, why is this? I was like, why is this a recurring theme? Like, either they're dead, they're dying, they are potentially drowning, or their entire civilization and species future has been destroyed. Like,
I didn't really think about it, but the stakes are oddly high in a lot of these.
yeah.
Well, I don't really have any more notes other than that because, well, we've gone on a lot longer than I expected to.
Yeah, I feel like at this point I have said my piece about a silly Disney Fairies Tinkerbell movies, which are surprisingly like they're not very in depth, but you surprisingly talk about them a lot. They're good talk pieces. So there you
Yeah.
go. Go on a date, watch Tinkerbell movie, and you can both bond over the complexities of the fairy realm and why it makes
Yes.
this sense. I think then when you go to dinner, you can have a conversation to talk about how you don't understand how the fairy world worked because I don't think the people who were working on the film understood how the fairy kingdom worked.
No, I think you're pretty much spot on there. I have a feeling they were just making it up as they went.
But all in all, I think it's fine.
Yeah. No, actually, for these, not that there's a very high bar, but like if you're classifying these alongside the other direct-to-video sequels that Disney made, most of these are a lot better than anything that they've
Yeah.
done before. There were a few, I don't want to say hidden gems because I don't think any of them were ever as good as the originals, but
Hmm.
there were a few that maybe could stand up to these. But all in all, I feel like the Tinkerbell series was probably as good as the direct-to-video sequels we're ever going to get.
Yeah.
So I guess if they're going to kill the direct-to-video line, this is a good note to go out on.
Yeah.
As a whole, it had a downer ending, but as a whole,
Yeah. Such a downer ending, man.
well, 3 hours later, I guess that's probably all we have to say about Tinkerbell and all of the various sequels to Tinkerbell. So until the next time, do you want to let people know where they can find you if they want more from you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Katie Draws Things, where I do not draw fairies, but I draw other things, and I have good time over there, so check it out if you want.
Okay. Thanks for listening to the Disney Movie Marathon. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe and follow my co-hosts as well. My link tree and all of our links will be in the description below. If you want more of my content, all my podcasts are available on YouTube as well as most podcast platforms. If you enjoyed this show, check out one of the other podcasts or check out my Patreon for bonus and extended episodes you won't find anywhere else. We'll be back soon with another brand new episode, so thanks for listening and we'll see you next time.